I never expected to spend a chilly September evening waiting outside a centuries-old tavern on Edinburgh's Royal Mile. The cobblestone street glimmered under a light drizzle, and the imposing silhouette of St. Giles' Cathedral rose a short distance away, giving a somber cast to the night. Yet there I stood, hands shoved in my jacket pockets, scanning the passing tourists and locals. The city's usual energy, the swirl of bagpipe tunes, the jostling crowds, had cooled, replaced by a damp hush. Even the caws of distant seagulls seemed muted. I was here to meet my cousin, Fiona. She called me out of the blue that morning, her voice carrying an urgency I couldn't ignore. We'd always been close, sharing a fascination for the ghost stories and hidden vaults of this ancient city, but lately she'd been on a different kind of quest. It started with her job at a local historical society, sifting through old records and diaries. She became obsessed with something she read, pages referencing the echo, a cryptic phrase that seemed to appear in scattered texts from the 17th century to the present day. She was late. My breath fogged in the crisp air and I checked my phone. No signal inside these stone walls, or so it felt. Just as I considered giving up, a figure emerged through the light mist. Fiona in a dark overcoat, hair wet from the drizzle. She drew close, eyes darting left and right. "Sorry," she said, breathing hard. "Had to make sure no one followed me." I frowned. "Followed you? Are you all right?" She tried to smile, but it flickered. "I'm fine, just, let's go inside. You'll want a warm drink for what I have to show you." She clutched a slim folder under her arm, pages visible at the edges. I recognized the symbol on one corner, some stylized crest with a curling line beneath it, reminiscent of a wave or echo. Moments later, we squeezed into the tavern's narrow entryway, brushing past a small group of tourists raving about Edinburgh Castle's evening light show. The tavern's interior was cozy, dark beams overhead, flickering candlelight on battered wooden tables. The aroma of spiced ale and roasting meat offered a comforting contrast to the eerie tension swirling around Fiona. We found a quiet corner booth out of earshot. She set the folder on the table, leaning close. "I've discovered references to something called the Echo in multiple historical documents. Letters, diaries, even an inquest from 1842. I'll say it's a presence, something that feeds on certain energies in the city. Some call it a spirit, others a curse. The details vary, but the locations named are consistent. The old vaults beneath the South Bridge, parts of Greyfriars Kirkyard, and a closed-off section near Holyrood Park." I raised an eyebrow. Ghost stories were common in Edinburgh, sure. We'd grown up hearing tales of Greyfriars Bobby's haunt, of the restless souls in the underground vaults. "What's different about this one?" I asked, sipping the mulled wine a server had just placed before me. She pulled out an old photograph. A pale blur hovered in the corner, almost human-shaped. "This was taken last month in the vaults. And look at these." She spread out copies of newspaper clippings about missing people, each disappearance unsolved. Goosebumps prickled along my arms. Fiona watched me gravely, her voice low. "I think the echo is real. And I think people are starting to vanish again." By the time Fiona finished recounting her findings, the tavern had filled with chatter and the warm glow of wall sconces. I could hear laughter at a nearby table, the clang of dishes from the kitchen. Yet a knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. Her words stuck with me, vanishings, repeated references to the echo, all pointing to hidden corners of Edinburgh's ancient skeleton. "Okay," I said, pressing a hand against the battered table. "So where do we start? The city is loaded with ghost tours and half-fabricated legends. How do we filter out hype from what might be real?" Fiona tapped the folder. "It's not just hype. Look at the pattern." She traced a line on a photocopied map of central Edinburgh, highlighting circles around specific sites. The vaults under South Bridge, the old closes off the Royal Mile, and an abandoned building near the edge of Holyrood Park. Each was tied to strange sightings or abrupt disappearances documented over 4 centuries. An old caretaker's journal from 1920 mentions hearing a resonant hum in the vaults. Another letter from the 1700s describes an echoing presence in Greyfriars. And in modern times, tourists claim they felt a presence following them, especially near Holyrood's old kirkyard ruins. I couldn't deny the coincidences. "So you believe this is some entity that's haunted the city for centuries?" She nodded, eyes burning with conviction. "I do. It's not a mere ghost, more like a force that reemerges every few decades. People say it resonates with those in despair or those who seek it. Some vanish without a trace." Her knuckles whitened. "I met a historian who tried investigating a year ago. He left abruptly, never came back. Emails bounced. It's like he vanished too." I let out a tense breath. So what's the next step? We can't just waltz into Holyrood Park at midnight and hope to find it, can we? Fiona pursed her lips. We might have to, but not blindly. I've arranged a meeting with someone who claims to have glimpsed the echo last week, an American grad student named Harper. She posted about it in a paranormal forum. We're meeting at Greyfriars Kirkyard tomorrow evening. Greyfriars? At night? I tried to keep the skepticism from my tone. Ghost tours often trod that ground for cheap thrills. But then again, it was precisely the sort of place a genuine phenomenon might linger. The city's granite tombs and headstones, centuries old, practically radiated the sense of history. Fiona checked her phone. We should head out. It's late and I have to scan a few more documents before tomorrow. After paying the tab, we stepped into the damp Edinburgh air. The Royal Mile glistened under street lamps. Tourists drifted by in twos and threes. I could hear the faint notes of a busker's violin. Yet I sensed we walked on the edge of something deeper, some hidden layer of the city that kept its secrets in the cracks between old stones. As we parted ways, Fiona gave me one last glance, caution and resolve mingling in her eyes. "Thank you for helping me," she whispered. "I need someone I trust." I simply nodded. My breath fogged in the cold. The wind seemed to carry a soft sigh along the deserted close. I shivered, remembering that old saying, "In Edinburgh's night, the past is never far away." My sleep that night was uneasy. I dreamt of echoing corridors, candlelit walls, and a swirling haze that seemed to beckon me forward. Usually, I dismissed nightmares as the product of an overactive imagination, but this time felt different. Waking in a sweat, I decided to shake it off by exploring the city in daylight before meeting Fiona. Maybe the rational bustle of morning crowds would ground me. I roamed Prince's Street, weaving among shoppers and sightseers, the majestic silhouette of Edinburgh Castle perched high above. The rational world persisted here, street performers, coffee shops, city buses. Yet when I turned onto a quieter close leading toward the grass market, a lingering hush swallowed me. The tall tenements blocked the sun, leaving the walkway dim. My footsteps echoed off ancient stone. The eerie hush reminded me of Fiona's talk about the echo, and I found myself hurrying to the open air beyond. Eventually, I landed at a cafe near Greyfriars Kirkyard. The place bustled with midday life. Latte orders, people typing on laptops, a dog wagging its tail by the door. I took a seat by the window, swirling a cappuccino that was too hot for a single gulp. The smell of roasted beans steadied me. I glanced outside, where the entrance to Greyfriars waited. The kirkyard had a storied past, famously haunted if local lore was to be believed. Supposedly, poltergeist phenomena ran rampant near certain tombs. Tourist ghost tours raked in money from the legends. But Fiona's references were more ominous than staged jump scares. She believed something old lurked there, connected to multiple sites around the city. I remembered how her voice shook as she described the caretaker's journal. While finishing my coffee, I pulled out my phone. No messages from Fiona yet, so I sent a quick text, "At Greyfriars Cafe. Ready whenever you are." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with her reply. "Meet me by the main gates at dusk. Don't go alone. I have a lead from Harper." My stomach tightened. Just a few hours to kill, then I'd step through those iron gates after sundown. To pass the time, I wandered the National Museum of Scotland, letting the exhibits distract me. The polished display cases of prehistoric artifacts, the bright dioramas of Scottish wildlife, it felt reassuring. But as I drifted to the corners less frequented by visitors, I came upon a small exhibit about Edinburgh's underground vaults. Some local archaeologists had excavated parts of them, displaying found objects, a battered shoe, broken clay pipes, rusted tools. The placard mentioned how these vaults, built in the 18th century, had become notorious for illicit activity and rumored hauntings. My heart fluttered at the mention of illicit gatherings. This city had always had a hidden side: body snatching in the Burke and Hare era, clandestine whiskey distilling, secret societies. Now I wondered if the echo thrived in those overlooked corners. The museum's clinical lighting and thorough text kept it all academic, but my mind strayed to Fiona's strange photograph, the swirling blur in that underground passage. By the time the museum closed, the skies had turned a muted gray. A creeping sense of anticipation slid beneath my skin. I made my way back toward Greyfriars, bracing myself for whatever came next. The city of stories, Edinburgh. But some stories, perhaps, refused to remain just stories. The sun sank low over Edinburgh's rooftops, casting long shadows across Greyfriars Kirkyard. I lingered outside the gates, the imposing stone walls lined with weathered tombs inside. Despite the swirl of modern city life just blocks away, this place felt timeless, locked in gloom even in the final threads of daylight. Fiona arrived right at dusk, wearing a warm coat and a determined expression. "Harper messaged me," she said, holding up her phone. "She's already inside, near the section they sometimes open for guided tours. Let's go." We slipped past the entrance. By day, Greyfriars drew tourists snapping photos of elaborate tombstones. Now, in the deepening twilight, it felt deserted except for a lone caretaker finishing his evening rounds. Gravel crunched under our steps. Towering monuments threw jagged silhouettes across the worn paths. The air smelled faintly of damp earth. Rounding a corner, we spotted a figure in a hoodie leaning against a massive tomb. She turned, revealing a young woman in her early 20s, hair partially dyed purple. She gave a cautious smile, relief crossing her features. "Fiona?" she asked in an American accent. "And you must be her cousin." We exchanged introductions. Harper's voice quivered when she confessed how she ended up here. A study abroad program, an interest in paranormal lore, and then an encounter 2 weeks ago. She had been exploring some lesser-known crypts at the back of Greyfriars, filming for her YouTube channel. That's when she glimpsed it, a rippling outline as though the air itself had grown dense, and a faint hum that made her ears ring. "You saw the echo?" Fiona pressed, leaning forward. Harper nodded. "I don't know what else to call it. One moment I was alone, the next I felt like I was in a crowd of whispers. My phone's battery drained from 80% to dead in seconds. Something was there." She swallowed. "It lingered near that old tomb with an angel statue. I ran out of here so fast, I nearly tripped over a grave. My pulse thudded." "And you came back?" She offered a shaky laugh. "I can't let it go. Something about that presence, it's like it calls you. I've had nightmares since." Then Fiona found my forum post. Fiona glanced at me. This was aligning with her theories. The echo was no mere rumor. She asked Harper to guide us to the exact spot. The caretaker had left, so the grounds were virtually ours. We passed rows of moss-covered tombs, inscriptions worn by centuries of Scottish rain. A faint wind rustled through the rowan trees overhead. The sense of stepping beyond normal boundaries thickened with every step. At last, we reached a small locked gate leading to what locals called the Covenanters' Prison, a notoriously haunted enclosure. The gate was padlocked for safety. Harper pointed through the iron bars at a far corner. "That's where I saw it. Over by that statue of an angel holding a sword." Fiona pressed her face close to the bars, peering in. Dusk had deepened to near darkness, and the angle made it hard to see much. I flicked on my phone's flashlight, shining it through. Rows of tombs stretched, an eerie silence pressing in. My breath caught in my throat, suddenly aware of how alone we were. The city might have been a world away. Without warning, a low moan broke the silence, drifting from the shadows. Harper gasped. Fiona's eyes widened. My flashlight jittered as adrenaline spiked. We couldn't see any figure. Just that moan, like wind through a hollow pipe, except it carried a resonance of sorrow. The sound curled around my senses, and for an instant, it felt like the ground itself vibrated. Then, as quickly as it came, it ended, leaving us with our pounding hearts in the gloom. We stood there, transfixed, each breath catching in the still air. The moan, if that was even the right word, had been like a distant lament, yet so close I felt it in my chest. Harper clutched the gate with white-knuckled hands, trying to steady her breathing. Fiona was the first to break the paralysis. "That could be it," she whispered, voice tight with excitement and fear. "We might have just heard the echo." My mouth felt dry. But it didn't appear visually. No shape. Harper exhaled shakily. "Sometimes it doesn't. The caretaker who told me about this place said people often just feel it or hear it and run. Some claim to catch glimpses of shadows or swirling mist. Others say they only notice a strange hush, like the city sounds are sucked away." We lingered by the locked gate, shining phone flashlights. Nothing else emerged, no movement among the tombs. The wind picked up, rustling dead leaves across the gravel. Part of me wanted to push further, but the caretaker's padlock barred us. Maybe that was for the best. A sense of dread warred with curiosity. Should we go find someone with a key? Or come back with permission? Fiona hesitated, glancing at the darkening sky. Might be best not to trespass or break locks. We should gather more info first. For tonight, let's accept this as proof we're on the right track. Harper agreed, relief evident in her posture. We retreated from the gate, the tension in the air palpable. In the main section of the kirkyard, old street lamps cast a faint glow, revealing worn paths. We huddled near a tall mausoleum discussing next steps. Fiona laid out her plan. We have references to the Echo in Greyfriars, the vaults, and near Holyrood Park. We just had an encounter here. Let's check the vaults next. If it's truly the same presence, maybe we can find a pattern. Harper bit her lip. I'm in. But the vaults can be tricky, lots of locked areas, guided tours only. Unless we book a private session or slip in illegally. I frowned, recalling how the city regulated those tours, especially after reports of rowdy visitors. We might manage a private arrangement. Fiona, you work with the Historical Society. Could you request an off-hours inspection? She nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I have some contacts. Could spin it as academic research. I'll try tomorrow morning. Satisfied, we exited Greyfriars, the gates creaking behind us. My heart still pounded from that moan, as though a part of me remained uncertain whether we truly wanted to meet the Echo face to face. Harper parted ways near George IV Bridge, promising to join us once Fiona set something up. She seemed half terrified, half thrilled. On the walk home, Fiona and I barely spoke. The city had grown quiet, only a few pubs still glowing. The normal bustle of the Royal Mile was replaced by cobblestone silence. My footsteps felt too loud, and the memory of that wail echoed in my mind. Just before we parted, Fiona squeezed my shoulder. We're onto something real here. Keep your phone on. Any sign of trouble, we call each other. Agreed. I nodded, watching her vanish down a close toward her flat. Left alone, I shivered in the chill breeze, scanning the old architecture for any hint of watchers or silent shapes. Edinburgh's centuries pressed on me, the knowledge that beneath these streets something lurked. Something that moaned in ancient sorrow or hunger, and might steal people away if they ventured too close. The next day felt like a blur of normalcy. Work obligations beckoned. I had a part-time gig editing travel blog posts for a local agency. Strange how easy it was to slip back into routine, answering emails, grabbing a sandwich from a little shop on Grassmarket. But any lull in tasks brought back the memory of that moan. My mind wandered, imagining how the Echo might manifest in the other locations Fiona had flagged. By late afternoon, Fiona texted, "Got an inn. Vaults on Sunday after official tours end. Private 1-hour slot. Grab Harper, meet at the info kiosk on Cowgate." She signed off with a single phrase that sent a jolt through me. Might see it again. I stared at my phone. Sunday was only 2 days away. Enough time to gather courage, I supposed. I messaged Harper, confirming she'd join. She responded almost immediately, "Count me in. Let's face the city's ghosts, right?" I spent the evening flipping through old articles about the vaults. They were built in the late 18th century beneath the arches of South Bridge, originally used for storage and workshops. Over time, the place fell into disrepair, rumored to house criminals, the destitute, even body snatchers. Modern tours played up the ghostly vibe, claiming sightings of apparitions. But as I scrolled, I found a lesser-known story. In 1842, a caretaker was found dead in one of the deeper chambers, cause unknown. Some articles hinted at intangible forces, though official records blamed it on exposure and ill health. The parallels to Fiona's Echo notes weren't lost on me. That caretaker's tale lined up with the inquest she'd shown me. My anxiety spiked. If we walked into the vaults at night, might we be tampering with the same entity that haunted Greyfriars? Saturday passed slowly. I tried to keep busy, laundry, groceries, a quick chat with a friend who invited me to a pub. I declined, mind too preoccupied with intangible horrors. I practiced what I might do if confronted by something unnatural. Hard to plan, really. But logic told me not to go alone, keep a flashlight and phone handy, perhaps a small first aid kit in case of accidents. Sunday arrived with a forecast of rain, but the morning was bright. That only made me more uneasy. Bad weather might have lent an excuse to postpone. Instead, the day seemed to push me forward to my rendezvous with Fiona and Harper. By dusk, I was pacing near Cowgate, a busy street lined with bars and clubs. The official vault tours had just ended. Tourists emerged from an arched stone doorway, some laughing about the cheesy jump scares, others looking spooked. Fiona arrived wearing a sturdy jacket, her expression resolute. Harper joined us minutes later, her hoodie pulled tight, phone in hand. We approached the kiosk where Fiona's contact, a short man named Ross, awaited. He looked harried, glancing at his watch. "Right, Miss Kinley," he said to Fiona, "you've got 60 minutes before we lock back up. Mind yourselves. Some areas are uneven." Harper and I exchanged a glance, hearts pounding. This was it. We were about to descend into Edinburgh's underbelly, searching for a presence that had rattled the city for centuries. Ross led us down the stone steps into a corridor lit by a few electric lamps. My breath caught at the musty smell of damp rock, the echo of water dripping. The city's hum faded behind layers of stone. Ross gave a curt nod, pointing to a metal gate. "I'll be up top. Phone me if anything goes sideways. But hurry. I'm not staying late." With that, he left us in the gloom, the gate clanging behind him. Fiona switched on her flashlight, as did Harper and I. We stood in a wide chamber, rough stone walls arching overhead. Old wooden beams and dusty corners whispered of centuries past. My heart thumped. Somewhere in these twisting vaults, the echo might be waiting. "Let's keep track of where we go," Fiona said quietly, shining her flashlight around the vault's interior. The walls glistened with damp, patches of lichen creeping across the stone. Thick darkness pooled in the corners beyond the few overhead bulbs. The air felt stale, carrying a faint reek of mold. We passed a row of small compartments, once used as storage rooms, now mostly empty. Some had crumbling bricks, others held random debris. Drips echoed from the ceiling, forming shallow puddles on the uneven floor. Each step we took reverberated in the enclosed space, intensifying the sense of isolation. Harper recorded with her phone, the camera light boosting our visibility. "This is where people claim they hear footsteps that aren't their own," she narrated in a hushed tone. "Where orbs show up in photos. Maybe we'll find more than orbs tonight." A twinge of tension ran through me. Part of me wished we'd see nothing at all. But Fiona pressed deeper, checking a hand-drawn map. "There's a corridor behind that arch," she said, pointing. "Rarely included in the regular tours, apparently too unstable. But it's in the caretaker's inquest notes from 1842. He wrote about hearing a hum there." We navigated carefully, stepping over broken stones. The corridor narrowed, the walls pressing in. Harper's phone light showed old graffiti in places, dates, initials, even a few crude drawings. The water dripping from overhead left everything slick, and I nearly slipped on a patch of algae. We found a small wooden door at the end, half rotted but not locked. Fiona gave it a tentative push. Beyond the door lay a cramped chamber. My flashlight revealed dusty footprints on the floor, some fresh, though it was hard to tell how recent. Wooden planks, likely centuries old, propped up part of the ceiling. The far corner was obscured in shadow. Fiona stepped in cautiously, scanning the space. Just then Harper's phone beeped, a battery warning. "That's weird, I had 60% left," she muttered, rummaging for a power bank. The phone flickered, then died. Anxiety lanced through me. This felt too similar to Harper's account in Greyfriars. Maybe the humidity was messing with her phone. Or maybe it was the echoes effect. Fiona stifled a gasp, her flashlight shaking slightly. "Guys, do you hear that?" My pulse kicked up. I strained my ears. At first, only drips in our breathing. Then faintly a low hum. It sounded like wind through a tunnel, except there was no breeze here, far underground. The hum rose and fell, almost melodic in its own unsettling way. Harper tried to record on another device, but it wouldn't power on. Her eyes widened. Something's not right. The hum deepened, vibrating in my chest. The flashlight in my hand flickered, and Fiona's did the same. Fear flared. What if all our lights died, leaving us blind? I inched closer to the exit, but an unseen force seemed to tug at my attention toward that dark corner. My heart hammered as I caught a glimpse of movement there, like a rippling shape, not solid, more akin to watery light. A swirl of grayish haze. All logic screamed to run. But curiosity and dread anchored me. Fiona stepped forward, voice trembling. "Is that you?" The echo. Her question sounded absurd, yet the swirling shape pulsed as though in response. Suddenly, the hum sharpened into a piercing note. We clapped hands to our ears. The flashlight stuttered, plunging us into near darkness. I felt the floor lurch under me, or maybe it was my own dizziness. The last thing I saw was Harper grabbing for my arm as the swirl closed in. When my vision cleared, I realized we were still in the same chamber, though the swirling form had vanished. The flashlights had stabilized, their beams cutting again through the gloom. My heart raced, adrenaline thrumming in my veins. Harper sagged against the wall, panting, while Fiona blinked rapidly as if shaking off a daze. The hum was gone, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I exhaled, legs trembling. What just happened? Fiona swallowed hard. I think we made direct contact. That swirl, some manifestation of the echo. Did you feel that force like a wave of pressure? She rubbed her temples, grimacing. Harper's eyes glistened. My phone shot. Again. I wanted to film it, but everything blacked out. She glanced toward the corner where we'd seen the swirl. It was right there. The chamber felt colder now. I tried to steady my breathing, mind reeling with the realization. The echo was tangibly real, not just a rumor. We'd encountered it face to face in a sense, and it left us rattled. For a moment, we all just stood there, hearts pounding, listening to the dripping water. Finally, Fiona slumped against the wall. "We should check on that corner, see if it left anything behind." Harper nodded, though her face radiated fear. We advanced cautiously, flashlights illuminating the dingy stone. The corner looked unremarkable, just a patch of wet rock, a couple of old wooden crates rotted to near collapse. But as Fiona brushed aside some debris, she uncovered an object wrapped in stained cloth. Carefully, she peeled back the layers, revealing a small leather-bound journal, its cover worn. "This could be from decades ago," she murmured, shining the flashlight on it. The name inside read E. Mason, 1842. My chest tightened. That was the caretaker's name from the inquest, wasn't it? Fiona's hand shook as she flipped a few brittle pages. Harper leaned in. "Read something out loud," she whispered. Her voice echoed unnervingly in the small chamber. Fiona skimmed a page, eyes widening. "He wrote about hearing the voice in the vaults, a resonance that calls men to their doom, and my life grows short, for the echo demands a witness." She swallowed. "He vanished, remember?" A ripple of dread. The caretaker's final words, perhaps. We had to wonder if he'd hidden this journal hoping someone else would find it. I had no idea how it ended up under crates, but clearly, we weren't the first to confront the echo here. Suddenly, we heard footsteps outside and my heart nearly stopped. A man's voice called, "Fiona? You in here?" It was Ross, the staffer. We hurried out of the chamber, relief mingled with wariness. Ross stood with a flashlight looking spooked. "Your hour's nearly up." Heard a loud noise, came to see if everything's fine. We exchanged glances. Fiona tucked the journal into her jacket. "We're all right. Just stumbled. We're heading out now." Ross gave us a once-over, brows furrowed. "Sure. Let's not linger," he muttered, guiding us back toward the main corridors. On the climb up, none of us spoke much. The vault's claustrophobic weight pressed on my mind, and I kept thinking about that swirl of haze in the caretaker's journal. If the echo demanded a witness, did that mean we'd just become part of its story? Emerging onto Cowgate felt like surfacing for air after nearly drowning. Cars rumbled by, neon signs flashed outside bars. Normal life reasserted itself. But as Ross locked the gate, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting another swirl of darkness behind me. Fiona clutched the journal, gaze distant. Harper looked ready to burst with questions. We parted ways under the city's street lamps, a silent agreement that we needed time to process what just happened, and to figure out the next step, for we'd come too far to turn back. The caretaker's journal from 1842 became our new obsession. The three of us met at Fiona's flat the next afternoon, a modest space near Brunsfield with plenty of natural light, an odd contrast to the secrets in that worn leather book. Fiona had carefully dried the pages, ensuring no further damage. We spread them across her dining table, each of us taking turns reading and summarizing. Mr. E. Mason's handwriting was neat but grew shaky in later entries. He described a haunting presence beneath the city, calling it the Echo. Some passages were borderline incoherent, full of scribbles. "It thrives in the hush, it devours the lonely, the deeper the darkness, the louder its call." He recounted hearing it first as a hum, then seeing faint shapes. Another note mentioned the moan at Greyfriars, confirming the link to the kirkyard. Near the final pages, he wrote that he intended to seal certain passages in the vaults, hoping to contain it. Then the entries ended abruptly. Reading it sent chills up my spine. Harper paced the room, phone in hand, though its battery still drained suspiciously fast. So, 1842. 2023 now, that's 181 years. Does the echo reappear at intervals, or has it lingered all this time, picking off victims? Fiona massaged her temples. Could be it's always here, but only grows strong enough to manifest every few decades. If Mason tried to seal it, maybe it was dormant for a while, but now it's stirring again. I winced. And we just saw how it drains devices, how it made us dizzy. If it can do that, can it also kill? Silence answered. None of us wanted to voice our growing suspicion that the echo was responsible for people vanishing, possibly forever. Fiona flipped through more pages. A mention of Holyrood caught her eye. Mason references the hill near the palace, where the resonance arises under certain moon phases. That's likely Arthur's Seat or Salisbury Crags, near Holyrood Park. He thought the phenomenon had a source there. Harper nodded. So that's the next location, Holyrood Park. but it's huge with lots of trails. Where exactly are we looking? We scanned Mason's final pages for clues. One entry read, "Under the crags, a chamber lost to time. The path from the north side leads to it, but the stones shift with each generation." Another was a rough sketch of the cliffs, though time and moisture had rendered it almost illegible. "Could be a hidden cave," Fiona murmured, "or a collapsed entrance. Locals do talk about old hideouts in Arthur's Seat. If the echo is truly anchored there, maybe that's the heart of this haunting." Harper exhaled, tension brimming. "We can't just wander blindly at night. We might get lost or stuck. And if that presence is there, it might do worse than drain our phones." We weighed the risks, but each of us felt the pull to see it through. If the echo was intensifying, we believed someone had to investigate or more vanishings might follow. Finally, Fiona proposed a plan. We'd do some daytime reconnaissance in Holyrood Park, using Mason's vague notes to identify possible cave entrances. Then, if needed, we'd return after dark with caution. My stomach twisted at the thought of stepping into a rumored hidden chamber. Yet I couldn't bear the idea of leaving this puzzle unsolved. The caretaker's desperation in 1842 haunted me. He tried to seal it away, and in the end, it seemed to have claimed him. We had to see if there was a way to break that cycle for good. We arrived at Holyrood Park the next morning, greeting a crisp breeze that fluttered across the open green space. In contrast to the cramped vaults, this wide expanse felt almost liberating. Arthur's Seat loomed to the east, an ancient volcanic hill, while Salisbury Crags formed a rugged cliff face overlooking the city. Tourists and locals milled around the main paths, jogging, walking dogs, taking photos of the scenic skyline. Armed with Mason's rough notes, Fiona led the way. We sought a north side path near the crags. Hard to pinpoint exactly, there were several trails. We decided to start from the Holyrood Palace side and loop around, scanning for any lesser-used tracks or rocky outcrops. Harper kept an eye on a map app, which fortunately wasn't draining as fast under the bright sun. The climb grew steeper, patches of grass giving way to stony terrain. Tourists veered off to ascend Arthur's Seat, but we skirted around, following a narrower route parallel to the crag. I felt the wind pick up, tugging at my jacket. Below, the city stretched out in a patchwork of spires and rooftops, the castle perched at a distance. It was breathtaking, but I couldn't forget why we were here. After an hour of searching, we stumbled on something promising. A half-hidden fissure in the rocky face, partially obscured by gorse bushes. Leaning in, I saw a dark recess that extended maybe 10 feet. It didn't look like a major cave, more like a weathered alcove. Fiona consulted the journal's map, such as it was. The shape sort of matched the scribbled outline. "Could be it," she said softly. Harper tested the ground near the fissure, stepping carefully over loose rocks. "Doesn't go far," she called, shining a pocket flashlight. "But there's a gap at the back. Feels like it might open further if we crawl." Her tone held both curiosity and wariness. We exchanged looks, deciding to push in. The space was tight, forcing us to crouch. My shoulders brushed rough stone, the earthy smell of damp rock filling my nose. After a few feet, we reached the gap Harper mentioned, a narrow tunnel descending at a slight angle. Fiona's excitement flared. It could lead to a hidden chamber. Mason wrote about a chamber lost to time. This might be it. We hesitated. We had no official gear, just some flashlights, a bit of rope, and our nerve. Yet the caretaker's lines about the stone chamber under the crags echoed in my mind. If the echo's core or anchor was here, maybe we'd find a clue to stop it. With a resolute nod, we pressed on. The tunnel forced us to crawl on hands and knees, rocks scraping my palms. The temperature dropped noticeably and the gloom thickened. After what felt like ages, in reality maybe 10 minutes, the tunnel opened into a small cavern. We unfolded ourselves, standing in a damp, enclosed space lit only by our flashlights. The walls bore faint chiseling marks as though someone had tried shaping them. A trickle of water dripped from above, forming a small puddle. The hair on my neck stood up. Something about this place felt deeply ancient, older than Edinburgh's normal layers of history. In a corner, near a cluster of rocks, we spotted something glinting. Fiona crouched to examine it, revealing rusted metal loops hammered into the wall, like old anchor points for chains or gates. The caretaker's words about sealing it away echoed in my thoughts. Had Mason tried to barricade this chamber once? Harper stepped carefully, recording on her phone again. "No sign of the echo right now," she whispered. "But this place, it's eerie." We all agreed. The stale air, the sense of hidden power. Even the drip of water sounded too loud, echoing off stones that had witnessed centuries. I wondered how soon the echo might come calling, or if we'd escaped its notice for now. For a moment, the cavern felt oddly serene, as though suspended in time. The only sound was the soft drip of water, echoing in the cramped space. My flashlight revealed nondescript walls, but I noticed faint carvings here and there, lines that could have been runes or just chisel marks. Fiona snapped photos, her brow furrowed in concentration. Harper moved closer to those rusted metal loops anchored in the stone. Chains? She guessed, voice hushed. Like someone tried to bolt a gate or a barrier here. Fiona brushed dust from a small groove in the floor. That lines up with the caretaker's idea of sealing something in. Could be that he or others tried to keep the echo trapped. Maybe it worked for a while. She fell silent, flipping through Mason's journal again, though the dim light made it hard to read. We explored the cavern's perimeter, stepping gingerly to avoid slipping on wet rock. The space was barely 15 feet across, with no obvious exit besides the tunnel we crawled through. No swirling presence, no ominous hum. For a second I felt foolish, risking a claustrophobic scramble for an empty chamber. But recalling how the echo manifested in the vaults, I doubted it was as simple as nobody's home. After a few minutes, Harper's phone beeped, battery again. She groaned, pocketing it. At least I got some footage. She turned to me, expression taut. Any plan if the echo shows up here? Like, how do we defend ourselves? I swallowed. We had no concrete plan. Mason's journal hinted the echo thrived on certain energies, fear, despair. One line read, "It feasts upon our darkest corners, drawn by mortal anguish." That sounded more psychological than physical. Could we chase it away by not being afraid? That felt naive. We might want to retreat if it appears, Fiona conceded. We can't risk confrontation in a cramped cave. She trailed off, frowning at a portion of the wall near the anchor points. This inscription looks interesting. Shining the flashlight, she revealed faint letters carved in old script. I leaned in, deciphering them with difficulty. "Let the watchers keep vigil, or the echo shall rise unbound." Harper exhaled, hair standing on end. We might be dealing with a literal ritual, like watchers who had to guard this place. If that duty lapsed, the echo roams free. She stepped back, hugging her arms. This is bigger than just a spook story. Suddenly, a hollow thump reverberated from the tunnel behind us. I spun, heart racing, shining my flashlight at the darkness. Could be a rock falling or an animal. My pulse hammered. We froze, ears straining. Then a second thump, closer. Something or someone was in the tunnel. Fiona gestured for silence, extinguishing her phone's flashlight. Harper and I followed suit, standing in darkness save for the faint watery glow from the cave's entrance. Another step scuffed the floor, accompanied by a ragged exhalation. My heart pounded so loud I feared it would give us away. A silhouette emerged in the dim light, a crouched figure. We glimpsed a hood or cloak. The figure paused at the threshold, head turning as though scanning the cave. A wave of dread clenched my gut. We were cornered, no other exit. My mind reeled with possibilities. Another urban explorer? Or something far worse? Fiona clutched my sleeve. Harper stifled a whimper. The figure advanced 2 steps, then hissed an intake of breath. They must have sensed our presence. My flashlight finger hovered, debating whether to blind them or keep quiet. But the figure made the choice for us, lunging forward with a low growl, a glint of metal. Was that a knife? Adrenaline exploded in my veins. Without thinking, I flicked my flashlight on, blinding the figure momentarily. They staggered back, cursing. In that flare of light, I saw a gaunt face beneath a hood, eyes wild, a small blade in hand. Definitely human, not some ghost. Fear sharpened into clarity. We were dealing with a real trespasser, possibly dangerous. Harper yelped, fumbling for her phone camera, but it was useless with no battery. Fiona grabbed a loose rock from the cave floor, brandishing it like a weapon. The intruders snarled, half covering their face from the flashlight beam. "Get out," they rasped, voice raw. "This place isn't for you." My heart hammered. "Who are you? Why are you here?" I demanded, though my own voice shook. The figure didn't answer, just spat curses. They seemed unhinged, someone who might be living out a twisted obsession with the echo. Or maybe they were a self-appointed guardian. The knife glinted ominously. As they advanced again, Fiona thrust the rock forward. "Stay back," she warned, breath shaky. The intruder hesitated, eyes flicking to the anchor points on the wall. A flash of recognition or fear crossed their face. Then they glanced at the 3 of us, presumably calculating the odds. We outnumbered them, albeit cornered. Time seemed to stretch. My flashlight beam wavered between their glare and the wet stone beneath our feet. Then, in a sudden motion, the intruder lunged sideways, sliding along the cavern's edge, aiming to block the tunnel exit. "You meddle with forces you don't understand," they hissed. "No one should awaken the echo. Leave now or you won't escape." A jolt of terror spiked. We certainly wanted out, but if this stranger blocked the tunnel, we'd be trapped. I took a step forward, voice trembling. "We're not here to awaken anything. We're trying to figure out how to stop it. Look, we have the caretaker's journal, Mason's notes. Maybe we can seal the echo again." At the mention of Mason, the intruder's eyes flickered with recognition. They pressed themselves against the tunnel's side, as if torn between attacking and fleeing. Finally, they let out a bitter laugh. "Sealing it? That door has been open too long. The watchers failed. Now the echo grows. Those who try to contain it vanish. You want to vanish too?" Fiona stepped forward. "No. But we want to prevent more vanishings. People are in danger. If you know something, help us." For a heartbeat, the intruder's gaze softened. Then a low rumble echoed from deeper underground. It was reminiscent of the hum we'd heard in the vaults, distant but menacing. The intruder stiffened, face contorting. "It's coming," they whispered, eyes darting to the rest of us. "If you value your lives, go." With that, they turned and bolted into the tunnel, footsteps vanishing up the slope. We hesitated, hearts pounding. Another pulse of that low hum vibrated through the cavern, stirring the stagnant air. My instinct screamed we had to leave. Harper's face was pale, and Fiona clutched the caretaker's journal like a lifeline. We raced into the tunnel, chasing after the intruder's retreat. Whether they had malicious intent or not, we couldn't remain in that buried space if the echo was stirring. Crawling out proved more treacherous than going in. The wet rocks shifted and I nearly lost my grip. By the time we reached the fisher's entrance, the hooded figure was gone. No sign of them among the scrub or along the rocky slope. We emerged into midday sunshine, gasping for breath. The wide sky was a jarring contrast to the claustrophobic gloom we'd left behind. We collapsed on the grass, hearts thundering. The city stretched below, a realm of normalcy we'd almost forgotten. Holyrood Park's open air never felt so welcome. Yet the intruder's dire warning rang in my ears: those who try to contain it vanish. We discovered the caretaker's attempts from 1842, found this hidden chamber, and encountered an apparent guardian or zealot. The question remained, what exactly did the echo want and how could we stop it? That afternoon, we retreated to Harper's rented flat in the new town. Her place was modern, a stark contrast to the medieval lanes we'd been crawling under. She brewed a round of strong tea, trying to steady our nerves. We slumped around her small living room, each grappling with the day's events. Fiona rubbed her eyes, exhaustion clear. "We have to make sense of it. The caretaker tried to seal the echo under the crags. Our hooded friend apparently wants people to stay away, or they might awaken it further. But the echo is already stirring, right?" Harper nodded vigorously. "If we do nothing, more vanishings might occur. People who wander into the vaults or Greyfriars might never return. But if we attempt to replicate Mason's sealing, we could be risking ourselves. Who's to say it won't just shift location?" I fiddled with my phone, checking local news. Nothing about robed intruders or cave incidents. Just the usual tourism pieces, a brief mention of a missing student from the university. My chest tightened. Another disappearance? Could it be the echo's doing? We turned to the caretaker's journal again. A certain passage caught our attention. When the watchers fail, the echo roams free. A sacrifice of presence or faith may quell it for a time, but to truly silence the resonance demands a binding of hearts. The archaic language was vague, but we gleaned a suggestion that communal effort or unity might be key to containing the echo. Something about a group standing together, reaffirming some vow. "This might explain references to watchers," Fiona murmured. "Perhaps they were a group who patrolled these key sites, preventing the echo from growing. Over time they disbanded or died off, letting it roam. The hooded intruder might be a lone remnant of that tradition." Harper frowned. "But how do we replicate a vow or communal binding from centuries ago? We don't even know the exact ritual. And that intruder sure didn't seem keen on cooperating." The conversation spun in circles, frustration mounting. Then Fiona's phone pinged. She checked it, her face paling. "I just got a text from an unknown number. Cease your meddling or risk the same fate as Mason. The watchers cannot save you now." She set the phone down, trembling. "They must be watching us. Maybe that person we saw or someone else in their group. They have my number?" Cold fear prickled at my spine. The watchers, if they even still existed, had singled us out. Or maybe a new faction had formed, harnessing the echo. Regardless, we faced warnings from both sides: do nothing or face dire consequences. Yet the caretaker's words haunted me. If no one tried, the echo might escalate. Harper sighed, glancing at a darkening sky outside. Maybe we need help. The police? The city council? Would they believe us? Fiona shook her head. Doubtful. We have no solid proof except a battered journal, eerie experiences, and a possible intruder. They'll chalk it up to ghost story mania. Plus, the entity is intangible. The real question: what if we let them know and they try an official crackdown, failing to handle a centuries-old phenomenon? A heavy silence settled. Finally, I voiced what we all felt: we can't walk away. If the echo's hunts are accelerating, we can't ignore that. But we need a safer plan. Something strategic. If Watchers used to maintain wards or something similar, maybe we can replicate that with Mason's text. I gestured at the journal. Let's see if we can decipher more. Time's running short. Night closed in, the city lights winking on. Each of us stared at the caretaker's spidery handwriting, searching for a clue that might reveal how to keep Edinburgh safe from a presence older than living memory. We spent the next 2 days combing through the caretaker's journal, cross-referencing it with archived texts Fiona had online access to. Harper scoured corners of the internet for local esoteric references, while I delved into the diaries of old watchmen published by the city's historical society. Exhausting work, but we snatched at every stray mention of Watchers or rituals. One theme recurred: the Watchers evidently rotated among the city's vulnerable sites, the vaults, Greyfriars, Holyrood, at intervals, carrying some symbolic object. Mason's journal called it the binding token. Its exact nature was unclear, maybe a carved stone or an inscribed relic. These Watchers, by presence and faith, kept the echo subdued. If they failed or quit, the entity gained power. We also found cryptic references to a convergence that happened once a generation, during which the echo grew bold, luring new victims. Possibly the era we were in now. If Watchers stood guard with the binding token at all 3 sites, the echo might be forced back into dormancy. At least, that's how we interpreted the archaic lines. It was guesswork, but better than nothing. Without the original Watchers or their instructions, we're winging it, I said one evening, eyes bleary from reading digital scans. But maybe we can improvise. If the caretaker sealed something under Holyrood, a place we found with those anchor points, then Watchers in the vaults and Greyfriars might keep the echo from escaping. Fiona frowned thoughtfully. So, a modern triad of Watchers, each carrying a token. The question is, what token? The caretaker's book? Or something else? Harper sat up. Remember that symbol on the caretaker's first page? The old crest with a wave or swirl beneath it. If we can replicate that on some items, stones maybe, then stand vigil at the 3 sites, it might mimic the Watcher's vow. It's a leap, but we have no better plan. The idea of physically standing guard in 3 separate haunted spots gave me chills. But we were desperate. Fiona created small stone medallions, using polymer clay and an old seal she'd found in a museum gift shop that resembled the swirling crest. She baked them in her oven, painting them with a protective clear coat. They looked rough but carried symbolic weight. We hashed out a schedule. The caretaker's notes suggested a strong manifestation near midnight, especially on nights of the new moon, 2 days away. We'd recruit 1 additional person to help watch if possible. But who? Our circle was small and we worried about safety. In the end, we decided to handle it ourselves. Harper volunteered to watch Greyfriars, I'd take the vaults, and Fiona, being the most knowledgeable, would stand vigil at Holyrood's hidden chamber. We'd place the stone tokens at each location, remain for an hour around midnight, and see if the caretaker's Watcher's method had merit. The plan was unnerving. We'd be alone in each spot, armed only with flashlights, the caretaker's journal, and these symbolic tokens. Could the echo pick us off one by one? Possibly. But we felt an odd sense of duty. If that hooded intruder had warned us away, maybe they feared we'd accomplish what they couldn't. Or maybe they were trying to save us from a gruesome fate. Still, a flicker of hope burned. If Watchers in the past had held the echo at bay, we too might succeed. The caretaker had failed alone, but we would coordinate, phones on speaker calls if signals allowed. Our hearts pounded with anticipation and fear as we geared up for the fateful night, uncertain whether we marched into victory or oblivion. The night of the new moon arrived, a black sky over Edinburgh. Clouds gathered, threatening rain, matching the tension thrumming in our veins. We met at the foot of the Royal Mile around 10 p.m., each of us carrying a backpack with our token, an extra flashlight, portable charger, and some emergency supplies. Fiona offered a shaky smile. This is it. We parted ways soon after. Harper set off toward Greyfriars, her footsteps echoing in deserted lanes. I gave her a tight hug before she left. She hid her nerves behind a half grin, promising to text updates. Fiona squeezed my hand, nodding as she headed for Holyrood Park with determined strides. That left me alone to tackle the vaults. Cowgate was quieter than usual, the nightlife apparently subdued this evening. I found the locked entrance Ross had used before. We had arranged a late-hour entry with him, though he made it clear he wouldn't stay. True to form, he opened the gate around 11 p.m., letting me in with a grim look. "Whatever you're doing, be careful," he said. "Heard weird stories lately." With that, he left me alone, the gate clanging shut. I descended the stone steps, each footstep resonating in the gloom. My flashlight cut a narrow beam through the vault corridor. A cold sweat traced my spine. The caretaker's notes about a powerful presence gathering near midnight looped in my thoughts. My phone showed 11:20 p.m. perfect. 40 minutes of waiting, plenty of time for fear to fester. In a side chamber, I found a stable corner to place my polymer clay token. I pressed it into a small crevice in the wall, hoping it would stay put. The swirling crest faced outward. My instructions were to remain vigilant, focusing my mind on repelling the echo. The caretaker's journal suggested watchers needed unwavering concentration, a kind of mental stance against the entity's lures. I forced my breathing to slow, mentally repeating that I wouldn't yield to any hum or swirl. Time crawled. The drip of water from overhead pipes became my metronome. Occasionally, I'd hear faint scuffs or squeaks, likely rodents or settling stones. I checked my phone. 11:45 p.m. Shivering, I tried to recall Fiona's plan. She and Harper would do the same, place their tokens, stand guard, mentally reinforcing the caretaker's vow. If we all held out until midnight and beyond, maybe it would quell the echo's surge. My phone buzzed, a text from Harper, at Greyfriars Gate. "This place is silent, can't see caretaker. Feeling spooked." I replied with a thumbs up, urging her to keep calm. Another message from Fiona. "In the cave. So quiet." Reading Mason's lines. "Good luck." The sense of solidarity helped, but I still felt profoundly alone in the vault's labyrinth. Then, at 11:59, everything shifted. My flashlight flickered. A subtle vibration coursed through the stone floor. The air seemed to thicken, pressing in on my ears. Anxiety spiked. I pressed my back against the wall, phone in one hand, flashlight in the other. The phone's battery indicator plummeted from 70% to 20% in seconds. My heart hammered. This was the echo's domain. A low hum started, resonating in my chest. My token on the wall grew faintly visible under the flickering beam, as if it glowed. Or maybe my eyes played tricks. Gritting my teeth, I whispered a mantra of sorts. "I am a watcher. I deny you entry. Return to your slumber." It felt silly, but it was all I had. The caretaker's vow pressed on my mind. My phone vibrated with an incoming call, from Fiona, presumably. Hands shaking, I answered. "Fiona?" My voice echoed in the corridor. On the other end, static crackled, then her voice. "I feel it too. Hold on." The swirl? She broke off. The call dropped. I cursed, checking the battery at 5%. My heart pounded. If the echo attacked them, was I powerless here? The hum intensified, a suffocating wave. I forced myself to stand firm, repeating the vow in my head. The caretaker's words about watchers came to me. "Bind your hearts in defiance." I clutched the phone to my chest, imagining Fiona and Harper doing the same. If we all believed in stopping it, might that intangible unity matter? Midnight struck, and the hum became an onslaught. My flashlight died, plunging the vault into blackness. The phone flickered, dropping to 1% battery. Panicked, I cried out, No, stay with me." My voice faltered as the phone screen dimmed, a last glimpse of the time, 12 a.m., then total darkness. I felt as though the corridor flexed, the stone walls rippling. A rush of air battered me, or maybe a psychic wind. My ears popped, and a moan reverberated, reminiscent of that night in Greyfriars, except 100 times stronger. The echo had arrived in earnest. Clutching the caretaker's journal in my bag, I tried to anchor myself. I recalled lines about watchers standing unwavering. Forcing my feet to remain planted, I raised my free hand in the darkness. "You will not have me," I rasped, voice trembling. "Nor them." I pictured Fiona in Holyrood's hidden chamber, Harper in Greyfriars, each reciting their vow. We might be separated physically, but mentally we were united. A swirl of luminous mist gathered, barely visible as my eyes adjusted. My heart nearly stopped. The swirl coalesced into a shifting silhouette. It looked vaguely human but distorted, limbs trailing off in wavy edges. A hollow resonance rattled the vault, like a choir of lost souls singing a single note. The figure advanced, exuding an intense cold that stabbed my lungs with each breath. My rational mind rebelled. This couldn't be real, some intangible force from centuries past? But it was right there, luminous and dreadful. I fought the urge to run. Instead, I pressed my back to the wall, focusing on the caretaker's vow. My thoughts reeled, bind your hearts. We are watchers. We do not yield. Over and over, as if mental repetition could hold it at bay. The shape paused as if uncertain. Waves of pressure rolled over me, threatening to crush my will. My knees buckled. I slumped, but kept my gaze locked on the swirl. You will return? I managed through gritted teeth, tears burning my eyes. My chest felt tight, hearing phantom whispers. They promised rest, promised an end to fear if I just surrendered. But I wouldn't. Not as long as Fiona and Harper needed me. Somewhere in the darkness, a faint beep, my phone trying to resuscitate itself? I heard static, then Harper's voice, unbelievably soft. We're watchers. We stand, we do not yield. Her voice flickered away, but it was enough to remind me we were in this together. A spark of courage lit in my chest. The swirl let out a rising wail, a lament that quivered at the edge of human hearing. My token on the wall glinted in the faint glow, as if resonating with the swirl. Then the swirl convulsed, receding slightly. I sensed a flicker of desperation from it. My meager vow, combined with Fiona's and Harper's, must be having an effect, tenuous as it was. With trembling resolve, I pushed myself upright. Return to your slumber, I whispered again. Leave these halls. The swirl shuddered, its luminosity fading in pulses. Another rush of cold slammed me, driving the air from my lungs. But I stood firm. I repeated the vow, imagining each word as a barrier. Then, in a final shriek, the swirl imploded, collapsing into a dim haze that sank into the floor. The hum cut out as though someone yanked a switch. Darkness reclaimed the corridor, broken only by my ragged breathing. My body sagged, exhaustion hitting like a tidal wave. The entity had withdrawn. Whether it was banished or just driven off, I couldn't be sure. But I still stood, alive. For a long minute, I couldn't move, adrenaline warring with fatigue. Slowly, the gloom took on shape as my eyes adjusted. My phone was dead, no flashlight either. So I stumbled blind through the vault corridor, hands groping the damp walls. I prayed Harper and Fiona had similarly driven off the echo, that they were okay. The caretaker's vow echoed in my mind, bind your hearts in defiance. Perhaps that small unity had saved us. Eventually, I found the main corridor leading to the exit. Ross was nowhere around, likely asleep. With difficulty, I unlatched the gate from inside, he'd shown me how earlier, and emerged into the crisp night. The city lights dazzled my dark-adjusted eyes. A wave of relief crashed over me, though worry about Fiona and Harper still lingered. I had no working phone to check on them. I half-jogged, half-stumbled across deserted streets, aiming for our designated meeting spot near the Royal Mile. The entire time I scanned the shadows, expecting the echo to reappear. But the city felt oddly calm. No moan, no swirling haze. Just the scuff of my shoes on the pavement, distant sirens, a lonesome breeze. When I reached the rendezvous, a small plaza near Street Giles, my heart soared to see two silhouettes waiting. Fiona clutched her bag, hair disheveled, while Harper slumped against a bench. They looked battered but alive. I rushed over, voice catching in my throat. You guys okay? Harper's eyes glistened as she gave a trembling nod. It came. Tried to, but I stood with the token. It was so cold, so loud. Then it fled. She exhaled a sob of relief. I think we pushed it back. Fiona just grasped my hand, tears shining. You made it. I was terrified you might not. Mine was horrible. I was alone in that cave. It felt like the rocks were caving in. But I repeated the caretaker's vow. The swirl retreated. I could hardly breathe. We huddled together, collectively shaking. A tension that had weighed on us for days began to lift. So, it might have worked? I asked. Do you sense if the echo is fully gone or just wounded? Fiona wiped her cheek. Mason's note said watchers must remain vigilant. We might need repeated vigilance. But for now it's driven back. The caretaker said a sacrifice of presence or faith could quell it. That's what we gave, our presence, our shared vow. Harper let out a shaky laugh. I don't want to do that again anytime soon. But if it means the city is safe for a while, it's worth it. We exchanged stories, each describing the swirl, the moan, the wave of draining cold. Our experiences aligned. The echo had manifested and then receded when confronted by our watcher's stance. Some intangible synergy across the three sites. I thought of the old watchers centuries ago, how they must have done this repeatedly, passing the duty down generations. A faint drizzle began misting the plaza. In the distance, the city's clock towers chimed. We were spent, but something like triumph mingled with our exhaustion. We'd faced an ancient menace, mirroring the caretaker's stand, and survived. Even if the fight wasn't over forever, tonight's outcome felt like a victory. We parted for some much-needed rest, vowing to meet the next day for final reflections and a plan to keep Watcher's knowledge alive. Morning brought a subdued dawn, the sky a gentle wash of pale light over Edinburgh's spires. We convened in a modest cafe off Princess Street, each nursing a strong cup of tea. The atmosphere was raw with fatigue but also a shared sense of relief. Fiona began quietly. I revisited Mason's journal after I got home. He wrote that watchers might only need to reaffirm their vow occasionally, every new moon cycle or if sightings recur. We might have to keep this up. She sounded weary but resolute. Harper nodded, swirling her mug. I don't mind checking Greyfriars once in a while, not alone though. If the echo tries to rise again, maybe we can stop it earlier. We might want more watchers eventually, training them in this vow. But I guess we have to figure out how to pass that on responsibly. I let out a long breath. What about the police or the city council? We can't exactly say, we're performing ancient vigil so a swirling presence doesn't devour people. They'd laugh us out or label us paranoid. Fiona frowned. We can't rely on official channels to handle a centuries-old supernatural phenomenon. We handle it quietly using Mason's knowledge. If vanishings continue, we might at least guide investigators away from ignoring it. But for now, let's see if the city remains calm. We sipped in pensive silence. The weight of an entire city's safety resting on our small group was daunting. Yet the echo had threatened us directly, so ignoring it was impossible. Part of me longed for the simpler days before Fiona found that old photograph. But we had glimpsed deeper truths, Edinburgh's hidden occupant, stirring under the cobbles and vaults, a living piece of the city's dark folklore. Harper eventually suggested we meet monthly, share updates, coordinate if we sense new disturbances. The Watchers wouldn't be a formal organization, just a tight circle sworn to vigilance. We agreed, though the idea of stepping back into those vaults still made my skin crawl. Our tokens remained in place, presumably continuing to emit whatever intangible barrier had repelled the echo. We'd keep spares in case they were removed. Finishing breakfast, we stepped outside into a city that looked as ordinary as ever. Shoppers milling about, buses rumbling by, a faint bagpipe tune from a street performer. Another day in Edinburgh, layered with centuries of history that most took for granted. But we knew a deeper layer now, an echo that haunted the tunnels and crypts. I breathed in the crisp air. You think it's gone for a while? Fiona lifted her gaze to the skyline. I sense it's dormant. We heard it or forced it back into slumber. But it's part of Edinburgh's bones. We can't ever erase it fully. We just watch so it doesn't become unstoppable. Harper gave a small, determined smile. Then we watch. We parted ways with solemn hugs. Each of us carried a new wariness and a quiet pride. The caretaker's efforts in 1842 hadn't been in vain. We'd built upon them, forging a new watcher's vow. As the bustling city surrounded us, it was almost easy to pretend that swirl of darkness never existed. But the hum, the moan, the swirl, they lingered on the edge of memory, a reminder that Edinburgh's centuries harbored both wonder and dread. And we, for better or worse, had become its watchers. Rory Kinsey never intended to spend his summer at Redwood Lake. He'd always imagined traveling somewhere exotic after graduating from college, maybe backpacking across Europe or volunteering in a country he'd only read about in magazines. Yet here he was, riding in the passenger seat of his dad's dusty Jeep, heading toward a cabin in the woods that he barely remembered from childhood. Their old family place stood near a rickety dock on Redwood Lake's quieter shoreline, an area miles away from the more popular tourist side with fancy resorts and restaurants. It had been nearly a decade since he last laid eyes on it. The drive into Redwood Lake was scenic, tall pines hugging winding roads, glimpses of crystal water between the trees, but Rory felt uneasy. His dad, Bill, was quiet behind the wheel. They had parted on rough terms when Rory first left for college, and they were just now attempting to mend old wounds. Bill's subdued demeanor didn't help quell Rory's anxiety. He couldn't tell if his father was tense about their personal struggles, or if something else was weighing on him. To distract himself, Rory stared at the towering pines. Evening shadows cast stripes across the hood of the Jeep. He recalled a few childhood memories, chasing frogs near the shore, roasting marshmallows under an impossibly bright sky full of stars. In those memories, Redwood Lake had felt magical. But that was so long ago. Now he was older, carrying a mental load of regrets and half-baked dreams. He wondered if the place would still hold any charm. When they arrived, the old cabin looked smaller than Rory remembered. The wood siding needed painting and moss covered parts of the roof. The porch had a noticeable dip, as if one corner had settled into the ground. Yet it still had a certain rustic appeal, perched on a gentle slope overlooking the lake. Pushing open the squeaky door, Rory stepped inside, coughing at the musty air. Dust motes danced in a beam of sunset light. Bill cleared his throat. "We'll get it cleaned up soon enough. I can start on the roof tomorrow." Rory nodded. "I can handle the inside. Wipe the counters, get rid of any spiders. We'll make it livable." Beneath his practical tone, he felt a flicker of nostalgia. There was something comforting about returning to a place where he'd once been carefree. They hauled luggage and groceries from the Jeep, working in near silence. Tension lingered between them, a reminder of the arguments left unresolved. But as night fell, a hush settled over the cabin that was oddly comforting. With no TV or internet to distract them, they ate a simple dinner of sandwiches and chips, listening to the murmur of water outside. Sitting on the back porch later that evening, Rory gazed across the lake's smooth surface. The moonlight revealed the outline of distant pines. It was silent except for the hoot of an owl and the faint lap of water against the shoreline. To his surprise, he felt a sense of belonging creep in. Perhaps Redwood Lake wasn't just a random place. Maybe, just maybe, it was exactly where he needed to be this summer. The first morning at Redwood Lake dawned cool and bright. Rory woke early, greeted by birdsong filtering through the open window. He left his dad still asleep, snagged an old sweatshirt and ventured down the steep path to the dock. Dew clung to the grass, and the pine needles left a sticky scent in the air. As he approached the water, he noticed a rowboat tethered to a creaking mooring post. A boat that must have been left behind by the cabin's previous tenant or by one of Bill's old acquaintances. A swirl of memories washed over him. Fishing with his grandfather, the thrill of netting a gleaming trout, the way the morning light sparkled across rippling water. He pushed aside the sense of longing and eased onto the dock, carefully testing each plank. It felt sturdy enough, though it sagged a bit with his weight. The gentle waves rocked the rowboat. Leaning over the edge, he saw his own reflection, a bit older and more worried than the carefree boy who once swam here every summer. He noticed an older man on the far side of the cove, casting a fishing line from his own wooden dock. The man gave a polite wave and Rory waved back. The neighbor seemed friendly enough. Maybe the locals wouldn't mind newcomers. Though in truth, Rory wasn't sure if he wanted to mingle with strangers yet. Letting out a sigh, he glanced again at the rowboat. Curiosity piqued, he gave the rope a gentle tug, testing its knot. It held tight, suggesting it was still in use. That meant someone else had been around recently. The thought unsettled him slightly, considering how remote this side of the lake felt. After a moment, he decided to head back to the cabin. He found his dad already up, rummaging through a toolbox by the kitchen window. Bill's expression was pinched, the tension lines around his eyes more noticeable. Rory wondered if the older man was anxious about finances, or about them reuniting, or something else altogether. They exchanged a few words about chores. Bill planned to patch the porch steps, while Rory would drive to the local store for fresh supplies. "I'll need the Jeep," Rory said. "Keys are on the hook by the door," Bill replied quietly. Then he cleared his throat. "If you go into town, maybe see if you can get a phone signal. I want to check in with your Aunt Karen, let her know we arrived safe." Rory nodded. Truthfully, he craved a few bars on his phone so he could check messages from old college buddies. Maybe they were traveling the world or starting fancy internships. Meanwhile, he was here, fixing up a worn-out cabin by a lake he once loved but now barely recognized. Yet a small part of him felt relief at stepping away from the hectic pace of modern life. Redwood Lake gave him space to breathe, even if it also dredged up complicated memories. As he drove toward the main road, the forest canopy overhead let through dappled sunlight. He felt the vastness of these woods pressing in. A whisper of wind rustled the pines. Though the setting was serene, he couldn't shake a sense of anticipation, as if something unseen stirred beneath Redwood Lake's calm surface, waiting to be discovered. 20 minutes later, Rory found himself rolling into the small town of Redwood Pines, a modest settlement that served as the gateway to the lake. It had a single main street lined with old-fashioned shops, an ice cream parlor, a bait and tackle store, a diner, and a small grocery. He parked near the grocery, noticing a help wanted sign in its window. That sparked a thought. Maybe he could pick up some part-time hours to pass the summer more productively. Better than just bickering with his dad all day. Inside, the grocery was cozy and cluttered, with shelves of canned goods and hand-painted signs announcing weekly specials. A tiny produce section sat to the left, stocked mostly with local berries and a few vegetables. Rory grabbed some milk, bread, and canned soups, then approached the checkout. A bored-looking teenager stood behind the counter, name tag reading Tessa. "Visiting?" she asked, scanning his items. "Sort of," Rory said, unsure how much to reveal. "Spending the summer at a place on Redwood Lake." She perked up. "Which side?" "The quieter side, by the old Dwyer cabin." Tessa's expression flickered. "Oh, that place. People say it's got, history." "History?" Rory echoed, raising an eyebrow. She shrugged, half smiling. "Just rumors. Some folks claim that side of the lake has unusual happenings at night, strange lights over the water, unexplained noises. It's probably just local superstition. Or maybe some bored teenagers playing pranks." Rory considered asking more but decided not to press. He paid and thanked her, stepping back into the sunshine. The conversation left him unsettled, though. Could Redwood Lake be home to local legends? He remembered old stories about ghostly apparitions or cryptids, but he'd always dismissed them as campfire tales. He resolved to keep an open mind, at least enough to explain any odd late-night sounds he might hear. Back in the Jeep, he checked his phone. 2 bars of signal. Good. He fired off a text to his Aunt Karen, letting her know he and Bill had arrived safely. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he texted a college friend, just to see if he'd get a response about job prospects or upcoming gatherings. A flicker of envy flared. His friends were probably living more glamorous lives. But maybe Redwood Lake had its own brand of adventure. He spent a few more minutes driving around Redwood Pines. The town had a volunteer fire station, a small library, and a handful of rental cabins grouped near the lake's busier side. Boat rentals, a kayak stand, that sort of thing. The difference between that side's mild bustle and his own remote cove was stark. Tourists ambled along the shoreline here, munching on ice cream cones, snapping photos of the picturesque water. Meanwhile, across the lake, the pines grew denser, the roads narrower, and fewer people ventured out. It made him feel both protective and wary of that solitude. Before heading back, he spotted a bulletin board by the bait shop, plastered with local news clippings and advertisements. A bright flyer caught his eye. Town meeting, Redwood Pines Community Hall, next Friday, 6 p.m. Topic: lake preservation and mysterious nighttime disturbances. Intrigued, he snapped a photo of the flyer on his phone. Maybe it was a good chance to see how real those rumors were. If anyone in Redwood Pines had experiences like Tessa hinted at, he wanted to know. By late afternoon, Rory returned to the cabin to find Bill on the roof, replacing damaged shingles. Sweat stained his dad's shirt, and a faint scowl creased his features. Concerned about the older man's well-being, Rory quickly put away groceries, then stepped outside to call up, "Need any help?" Bill paused, shading his eyes from the sun. "I'm managing. Already replaced a few rotten ones. It's not too steep up here." Rory couldn't help noticing the wobble in the old ladder. "I can hold the ladder, at least." Grateful acceptance flashed in Bill's expression. He nodded, descending carefully. Together, they adjusted the ladder's angle, then Bill climbed back up. Rory stood at the base, mentally preparing to climb if necessary. Over the next hour, Bill hammered new shingles in place, while Rory fetched tools and offered a steady anchor for the ladder's base. Despite the physical labor, the atmosphere felt calmer than the tension they'd had earlier. Small acts of teamwork soothed some of the raw edges between them. At one point, Bill glanced down. "How was town?" "Small," Rory replied. "Not much going on, but there's a community meeting soon about weird happenings on the lake." Bill grunted. "Figures. People around here love a good rumor. Probably kids partying at night, making noise." Still, the older man's tone suggested a flicker of curiosity. They finished the roofing task just before dusk. Tired but accomplished, they sat on the porch with cold drinks. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth. Bill sighed, rolling his shoulders as if to ease tension. "Thanks for the help, kid." Rory half smiled. His dad hadn't called him kid since he was 12. It was strangely comforting. "Sure thing. You hungry? I can heat up some soup." "Sounds good," Bill replied. "My back's killing me, so I'll take any hot meal I can get." He paused, gazing out at the lake. Must be quiet at night, huh? Rory nodded. Almost too quiet. I might go for a short walk after dinner. After they ate, darkness settled in. The moon was only a faint sliver, so the yard was enveloped in deep shadow. Rory found a flashlight by the kitchen door and slipped outside, carefully stepping down the porch. The cicadas had begun their evening chorus, joined by frogs near the shore. Each step toward the dock was accompanied by that subtle hum of nocturnal life. Reaching the dock, he let the flashlight beam skim over the water's surface. It looked still and dark, a blank mirror reflecting the sky's distant stars. The hush drew him in. He thought of Tessa's comment about strange lights, or local rumors. Nothing seemed out of place tonight. Then a faint splash echoed across the water, making him jump. He swept the flashlight around but saw nothing except gentle ripples. Probably a fish breaking the surface. He exhaled, heart still thumping. This was silly, he had no reason to be jumpy. Yet something about Redwood Lake's nighttime hush felt charged. As he turned to head back up the path, he paused. In the faint moonlight, among the tall pines, he thought he spotted a single flicker, like a small lantern or a flashlight beam far off in the woods. He squinted, trying to focus, but the light vanished. Maybe it was just a star between branches. With a nervous shrug, he trudged back to the cabin, forcing himself not to dwell on half-seen glimmers in the dark. Over the following days, Rory settled into a routine. He rose early to help Bill with repairs, replacing loose porch boards, cleaning gutters, even repainting part of the cabin's siding. The physical work, though tiring, grounded him in the present. It also offered fleeting moments of camaraderie with his dad, times when Bill cracked a rare joke, or when they shared triumphant grins after fixing something that had seemed beyond hope. Yet there were undercurrents of tension. Rory kept noticing Bill rubbing his temples, wincing at random moments. The older man hadn't said anything about health problems, but Rory couldn't help but wonder if all the labor was taking a toll. He tried not to push the topic, knowing how his father could be stubborn about personal matters. In the afternoons, if chores finished early, Rory would walk or drive into Redwood Pines. He'd linger by the library, flipping through local history books or scanning the town's bulletin board. He found references to Redwood Lake's logging era, the old sawmill that once operated near the inlet, and scattered anecdotes of eerie occurrences. Nothing too concrete, just vague stories about sightings of ghostly forms at twilight. He jotted notes in a small spiral pad, unsure why he felt so compelled to document these rumors, yet propelled by curiosity. Meanwhile, Bill mostly stayed at the cabin, sometimes driving out for building supplies. He grew more withdrawn each evening. On the third night, Rory heard him pacing the porch past midnight, seemingly unable to sleep. The next morning, Bill snapped at him over a trivial matter, mismatched nails for the porch steps. Rory bit back an angry retort, remembering their plan to rebuild their relationship. Still, the air crackled with unspoken frustrations. That day, Rory decided to take the rowboat out around sunset, if only to clear his head. Bill muttered a half-hearted warning about not staying on the water too late. But Rory needed the quiet solitude. Equipped with a life vest, a flashlight, and a thermos of water, he rowed away from the dock, the boat gliding smoothly across the lake's surface. The sky blazed with reds and oranges, reflecting in the water until it was like rowing across liquid fire. As dusk deepened, the temperature dropped. Rory let the boat drift, gazing at the silhouette of tall pines. A loon cried in the distance, its mournful call echoing across the lake. He closed his eyes, inhaling the crisp air. For a moment, everything felt right, like Redwood Lake was a living tapestry that could heal old wounds. Then a soft sound shattered the calm. It was like a whisper, too faint to discern words, yet so distinct that it made him tense. Peering around, he saw only the darkening shoreline. No sign of any person or animal. A trick of the wind, maybe? He tried to shrug it off. But as he turned to row back, he heard it again, a gentle hiss of syllables drifting across the water. A chill crawled up his spine. This time, it reminded him of someone trying to speak from very far away. He fought the impulse to panic, rowing harder until the rhythmic pull of the oars drowned out the lingering hush of that strange whisper. That night, Rory lay awake in his old twin bed, half expecting to hear more whispery voices outside. The cabin's walls felt thin under the gusts of wind. Overhead, the rafters creaked. He kept telling himself it was just his imagination, that there was nothing on the water but fish and occasional nighttime breezes. Yet he couldn't shake a nagging unease. He drifted into a fitful sleep and dreamed of being a child again, splashing in the shallows with carefree abandon. In the dream, a shadow drifted across the lake and the water turned cold. He woke with a start before dawn, heart racing. Eager to calm his nerves, he stepped outside to watch the sunrise from the porch. To his surprise, he found Bill sitting there, wrapped in a thin blanket. His dad looked haggard, dark circles under his eyes. The two men exchanged awkward glances. Couldn't sleep? Rory ventured softly. Bill inhaled a shaky breath. Headache won't go away. He paused. Look, I'm sorry I got short with you yesterday. Just got a lot on my mind. Rory nodded, settling onto the porch step. No worries. Anything you want to talk about? After a long silence, Bill sighed. When your mom and I split, I handled it badly. Poured all my energy into work. Neglected everything else. Including you. Rory swallowed. It was rare for his dad to open up about those days. I didn't make it easy either. I ran off to college, hardly came back. Bill's gaze lingered on the far horizon. I know. Now I'm trying to fix up this place like patching a cabin will make amends for everything. But it doesn't work like that. Rory felt a pang of empathy. No, it doesn't. But maybe we can at least talk about it. Start fresh. They sat in silence, side by side, watching the first rays of sun gild the treetops. Despite the tension, the moment felt like a small breakthrough. When Bill finally went inside to rest, Rory stayed out, letting the day's warmth fill the porch. He resolved to keep trying to bridge the gap between them. Later, he drove into town again, this time determined to attend the community meeting posted on the flyer. A small knot of residents stood outside the community hall, chatting in low voices. Tessa, the grocery clerk, waved him over. Rory recognized a few faces from around town but felt too new to greet them by name. The atmosphere was tense, as if everyone expected to hear troubling news. The meeting began with an older woman, introduced as Mayor Morrison, discussing standard agendas, funding for dock repairs, updates on local roadwork. Then came the part about nighttime disturbances. She spoke carefully, saying a handful of folks claimed to hear odd voices echoing across the lake or see unexplained lights among the pines. Law enforcement had looked into it but found no solid evidence. No trespassers, no break-ins. A tall man in a flannel shirt raised his hand, claiming he'd witnessed a glowing orb drifting above the water just 2 nights ago. Another woman mentioned hearing a haunting, whispered chanting that made her dog bark uncontrollably. Skeptics rolled their eyes, while believers nodded fervently. Rory's pulse quickened. The whispers he'd heard in the boat suddenly felt less imaginary. Before the meeting ended, the mayor urged calm. She reminded everyone that Redwood Lake had always had stories like this, probably just illusions or confusion. But as the crowd filtered out, Rory caught fragments of hushed conversations, fear lurking beneath polite smiles. It wasn't just him who sensed something off. The question was, what was Redwood Lake hiding? The next day, Bill insisted he was fine, though he winced occasionally as if fighting off a persistent headache. Rory coaxed him into taking it easy, offering to drive alone to a lumber yard for more supplies. The drive felt longer this time as he detoured past a scenic overlook that faced Redwood Lake's widest expanse. Cloudy skies gave the water a steel-gray color, and a brisk wind created small whitecaps. He parked for a few minutes, leaning on the guardrail, lost in thought. He replayed the neighbors' stories, glowing lights, strange whispers, phantom chanting. Growing up, he'd never encountered anything supernatural here, just typical wildlife and a sense of calm. Could Redwood Lake have changed so much, or was he simply noticing something that had always been lurking? A sudden cough pulled him from his reverie. An older woman, wearing a scarf and a kindly smile, approached. Lovely view, isn't it? He returned the smile. Yeah, despite the clouds. She introduced herself as Deirdre Lancaster. In the small-town way, she asked if he was new to Redwood Pines. He explained he was staying at the old Dwyer cabin. Her brow furrowed slightly. Some folks around here consider that spot, well, let's just say it's known for quiet nights and odd echoes. She gave a cryptic shrug. Rory probed gently. Odd echoes. Deirdre hesitated, then spoke in a hushed tone. It's probably just tall tales, but they say near that cove, you can sometimes hear voices carrying across the water at night, like they're calling to someone. His skin prickled. I've heard a bit about that. Haven't seen anything definite, though. She nodded, something sympathetic in her gaze. This lake holds a lot of history. Some good, some sorrowful. My advice, trust your instincts but don't let fear control you. Enjoy the nature. Don't be afraid to ask questions, but do it respectfully. They parted ways, leaving Rory unsettled yet oddly reassured. Deirdre's words had a gentle sincerity. Perhaps Redwood Lake was steeped in memory, both personal and collective. The deeper he dug, the more convinced he became that something intangible lingered beneath the lake's glossy exterior. But was it truly supernatural, or a reflection of the emotional baggage so many folks carried? At the lumber yard, he purchased fresh boards and a new hammer, chatting briefly with the clerk about weather forecasts. On his way out, he spotted a dusty corkboard near the exit, pinned with local business cards and missing dog flyers. One older, faded poster caught his eye, "Missing, Bethany Rose. Last seen near Redwood Lake. If you have information, contact Redwood Pines Sheriff's Department." It was dated 5 years ago. Rory's stomach twisted. Had she ever been found? He drove back to the cabin with the windows down, crisp air swirling inside. The combination of rumor, personal encounters, and local stories weighed on him. While Redwood Lake's mysteries gnawed at his curiosity, he also worried how Bill fit into all this. His dad's fatigue and irritability might be nothing more than middle-aged stress. Or maybe Redwood Lake's hush held something that amplified old hurts, old regrets. Rory resolved to keep his father's health in check, while also seeking answers about the peculiar phenomena creeping through these pines. Afternoon clouds gathered low over the treetops, hinting at a potential storm. Undeterred, Rory set about reinforcing the porch steps with the lumber he'd brought. Bill hovered nearby, double-checking measurements. Their earlier friction softened into cautious teamwork. Each time Bill winced, Rory offered a break, but the older man just shook his head stubbornly. They worked in near silence until the sky rumbled with distant thunder. Reluctantly, they hauled tools inside, placing them by the kitchen door. The cabin's interior dimmed as the storm rolled closer. Wind rattled the windows, bringing a chill that made the old floorboards creak. From the living room window, Rory watched the lake turn choppy, rain spattering its surface in irregular bursts. "Remember that massive thunderstorm years ago?" Bill asked quietly, glancing over. "When you were about 10, you wanted to run outside and dance in the rain. Drove your mother crazy." Rory smiled, recalling the memory. "Yeah, I was soaked head to toe. She made me drink hot cocoa afterward." A soft chuckle escaped Bill. "Some nights, I wish we could rewind to simpler times." Thunder cracked overhead, momentarily lighting the sky. With a sigh, Rory lit a couple of old oil lamps, an emergency fallback if the power flickered. He noticed Bill massaging his temple again. "Seriously, Dad, maybe we should get you checked out by a doctor in town. These headaches have been going on too long." Bill waved a dismissive hand. "I'll be fine. Might just be the change in barometric pressure." The conversation ended there. As the wind howled outside, they played a few hands of cards by lamplight, an oddly comforting ritual from the past. But an undercurrent of tension remained. The rush of rain against the roof reminded Rory of the hush he'd heard on the lake. The walls felt closer, as if the storm was pressing on them. Later, when the rain subsided, Rory stepped onto the porch. Puddles reflected the gray sky. He inhaled the petrichor, trying to shake off unease. Then he noticed something unusual, a narrow path of footprints in the mud, leading toward the side of the cabin. They looked fresh, pressed deep by heavy boots. He frowned. Neither he nor Bill wore boots that size. Could it have been a passing hiker? But why walk so close to the cabin, right after a downpour? He followed the prints around the corner, but they vanished at a patch of wet grass. Could the intruder have turned back, or merged with the undergrowth? A chill crawled over Rory's skin. He glanced around, half expecting to see someone lurking among the dripping pines. No one. The air was thick with moisture and the fading echoes of thunder. Returning inside, he locked the door, something they hadn't bothered to do until now. Bill asked what was wrong, but Rory just shook his head and muttered something about stray hikers. He didn't want to alarm his dad. But privately, he wondered if Redwood Lake's nighttime rumors extended beyond whispers and lights. The footprints suggested a physical presence. Someone might be roaming around their remote cabin, uninvited and unseen. Evening fell once more, calm now that the storm had passed. Bill retired early, complaining of exhaustion, while Rory found himself restless. The footprints weighed on his mind, and he decided to quietly investigate the perimeter. Armed with a flashlight and a cautious sense of purpose, he stepped into the cool night air. A partial moon glowed through thinning clouds, illuminating patches of forest floor. He circled the cabin, scanning the muddy ground for tracks. Sure enough, he found a second trail behind the house, fainter but resembling the same boot pattern. It led to a thick cluster of bushes near the tree line and simply stopped. No sign of a campsite or trash, nothing that indicated who it might be. He thought about the rumors of strangers or lights. If someone was creeping around, they might be the source of Redwood Lake spook stories. But Tessa had mentioned strange lights existed for years. This could be a bigger puzzle than just one meddler. Still, caution nagged him. If a real trespasser lurked around, Bill's and his safety could be at risk. Against his better judgment, Rory ventured a few steps into the woods, shining the flashlight on mossy trunks. The hush was profound, broken only by his own breathing. Then something snapped behind him, a twig maybe. He spun around, heart jolting. His beam revealed only swaying branches. "Hello?" he called softly, voice trembling. No reply. He pictured a fox or deer scurrying away, but the tension in his shoulders wouldn't ease. Abandoning the search, he returned to the porch, locking the door again. He told himself it was probably nothing. Yet doubt lingered as he prepared for bed, wishing Redwood Lake's mysteries would unravel themselves in the daylight, not in these unsettling shadows. He dreamt that night of the rowboat drifting on black water, a faint figure on shore beckoning him closer. In the dream, he rowed frantically, but the figure always vanished just before he reached land. Waking in a cold sweat, he took a moment to ground himself. He was safe in bed, the cabin quiet, Bill sleeping in the next room. Still, the dream left him unsettled. Morning arrived with a gentle breeze and a persistent tapping on the roof, tree branches or maybe a playful squirrel. Bill seemed a bit better, rummaging in the kitchen for coffee. Rory poured himself a cup, swallowing an impulse to share details of the footprints. His dad had enough on his plate. But tension gnawed at him. Deciding to distract himself, he suggested a trip around the lake's perimeter, maybe some father-son fishing. "We can pack lunch, check out the far side near the inlet," Rory offered. Bill hesitated, rubbing his temple. Eventually he nodded, mustering a small smile. "Sure. Been a while since we fished together." They loaded tackle into the Jeep. Before they set off, Rory locked the cabin carefully, checking windows. Bill raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. The drive around Redwood Lake took them along winding roads that skirted rolling hills, with occasional glimpses of water through thick pine stands. Rory forced small talk about fishing lures, hoping to bury last night's anxieties under mundane conversation. But in the back of his mind, a question lingered. Who or what was out there in the woods at night? The inlet at Redwood Lake's far side was breathtaking. Tall reeds swaying in a gentle breeze, lily pads dotting the shallow water. This area saw fewer day trippers, offering a quieter spot for fishing. Bill maneuvered the Jeep onto a patch of grass near a worn dirt path. They hopped out, rods in hand, coolers slung over Rory's shoulder. As they walked toward the bank, Bill's steps seemed lighter. He breathed in the crisp air. "I forgot how calming this place can be," he said, a trace of wonder in his voice. Rory smiled, hoping these glimpses of peace might soothe some of his father's restlessness. They found a decent spot under a willow tree. Rory rigged up a bobber and hook, carefully attaching a wiggling worm. Bill opted for a lure, casting methodically into the deeper channel. For a while, they fished in companionable silence. The water gently lapped against the reeds, and a heron stalked the shallows nearby. As minutes turned to an hour, they chatted idly about inconsequential topics. Favorite meals, random memories from Rory's childhood. Bill even laughed when Rory recounted a silly story about a dorm prank. It felt, for a moment, like they were bridging some gap that had kept them distant for years. The gloom of Redwood Lake's mysteries faded into the background. That was, until Bill reeled in his line and frowned at the lure, squinting as if in pain. He lifted a hand to his temple again, hissing out a pained breath. Rory dropped his rod, stepping closer. "Dad, that's it, we're getting you checked out. Headaches this intense aren't normal." Bill resisted, but a wave of dizziness forced him to sit on a nearby log. "Fine," he relented, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We'll see a doctor in Redwood Pines tomorrow." Rory exhaled with relief. He realized how much he'd been worried, half afraid Bill would collapse at any moment. They packed up their gear, deciding to head back. No fish caught, but at least they had a plan for medical care. Rory was too tense to enjoy fishing now anyway. Returning to the Jeep, they stopped briefly at the Redwood Pines pharmacy to grab some over-the-counter pain relievers. The pharmacist, an older gentleman with gentle eyes, warned that persistent headaches could signal anything from stress to more serious conditions. Bill mumbled something about just stress. Rory forced a polite smile, not wanting to embarrass his father with further questions. Later at the cabin, Bill took the medication and lay down. Rory retreated to the porch, pondering the events of the past week, strange whispers, footprints, and now Bill's stubborn health issue. Everything felt interconnected somehow, as though Redwood Lake's quiet was amplifying hidden troubles. He found himself wishing he could talk to someone who understood. Tessa? Deirdre? Perhaps the mayor? But he wasn't sure how to approach them without sounding paranoid. As dusk approached once more, he stared out at the lake, the water turning golden under the setting sun. He wanted to believe Redwood Lake was merely a scenic retreat, a place for healing. But shadows lengthened among the pines, reminding him that some secrets might lurk just beyond the comforting glow of daylight. Night brought a restless energy. Bill turned in early again, leaving Rory alone in the dimly lit cabin. He found it impossible to concentrate on the paperback novel he dug out from a dusty shelf. Something about the hush outside kept drawing him to the window, where the lake shimmered faintly in moonlight. On impulse, he grabbed a flashlight and decided to follow the same path that circled toward the neighboring property. He recalled seeing a flicker of movement in that direction days ago, and maybe meeting the neighbors could ease his unease. If they were normal folks, he'd reassure himself nothing strange was afoot. The path meandered through towering pines. Twigs snapped under his feet. A light breeze carried the earthy scent of moss and pine needles. He kept the flashlight aimed low, trying not to disturb wildlife. After about 10 minutes, he spotted a warm glow up ahead, a cabin, smaller than his own, with a single lamp burning in the window. He approached cautiously, clearing his throat as he neared. "Hello," he called softly. "Anyone home?" The door opened, revealing a man in his 60s with a trim beard. He wore an old flannel shirt and thick socks. His face was initially startled, but then he relaxed. "Evening," the man said, stepping onto the porch. "You lost." Rory introduced himself, explaining he was staying at the Dwyer place with his dad. "Just wanted to say hello, maybe ask if you've noticed anything odd at night." The man introduced himself as Daniel Cobb. He waved Rory inside, offering a seat by the fireplace. Daniel's cabin was cozy, a few shelves of books, a threadbare rug, and the gentle crackle of logs. Once Rory sank into an armchair, Daniel poured them both a cup of chamomile tea. "So, you're curious about Redwood Lake's nighttime rumors?" Rory nodded, relieved that Daniel didn't mock him. He recounted the faint whispers he'd heard, the footprints around his place, the rumored lights others mentioned. Daniel listened intently, brow furrowing. "I've lived here year-round for nearly 15 years, Daniel began. "I've seen a few strange things. Flickers of light among the trees, especially near the cove. Once I heard a moan echo across the water, like someone calling for help. When I went out in my canoe, there was nobody around." "Did you ever report it?" Rory asked. Daniel sighed. "Told the sheriff a couple of times. They came out, found nothing. Told me it was probably a trick of acoustics over water. Redwood Lake can carry sound in odd ways." Rory sipped his tea, feeling a kinship with Daniel's practical approach. "So you think it's just illusions?" "Not necessarily." Daniel stared into the fire. "But it might not be ghosts either. Some say Redwood Lake was once sacred land for an indigenous tribe. Others claim people have used the remote areas for gatherings, cults, smugglers, who knows. Hard to separate fact from myth." He offered a faint smile. "Or maybe it's just the lonely environment playing tricks on the mind." They chatted for another hour, discussing local history and how Redwood Lake's population swelled in summer, then shrank to a few diehards in winter. Daniel warned Rory to trust his gut. "If you suspect someone's creeping around your place, be cautious. It's usually quiet folks here, but you never know." As Rory made his way back in the cool night air, Daniel's words echoed in his head. Something was indeed off about Redwood Lake after dark. Whether mundane or mystical, he wasn't sure. By the time he reached home, Bill was asleep, the cabin silent except for the ticking clock. Rory secured the doors and windows, uncertain whether tomorrow would bring clarity or only deepen the lake's mysterious hold on them. Morning's bright sun melted away the night's lingering apprehension. Bill awoke feeling marginally better and agreed to drive into Redwood Pines for a doctor's visit. Rory accompanied him, nerves on edge but grateful his dad was finally taking it seriously. The clinic was small, just a couple of exam rooms and a sleepy waiting area. They waited under flickering fluorescent lights until Dr. Randall, a kindly middle-aged physician, called Bill in. Rory flipped through a local magazine in the lobby, heart pounding. A wave of guilt washed over him. Why did it take so long to see a doctor? Maybe if he'd insisted sooner, Bill wouldn't have to endure these headaches. He tried to distract himself with an article about Redwood Pine's attempt to lure more tourists. The piece glossed over any hint of eerie legends, focusing on the lake's beauty, the fishing, and local crafts. After a half hour, Bill emerged, shrugging. They did a basic exam. Could be tension headaches or maybe sinus issues. Doc wants me to get some scans if it persists. He looked annoyed but at least less pained. "That's good," Rory said carefully. "At least you have a lead." They swung by the pharmacy again for a different medication, then decided to stop at a small cafe for lunch. The place was cozy with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu listing soups and sandwiches. Over steaming bowls of tomato soup, Bill seemed a bit more relaxed, though he still rubbed his temples occasionally. Rory cleared his throat. "While you were in with the doctor, I was thinking about the weird stuff we've been hearing. Footsteps, whispers, all that. The neighbor Daniel says this lake can be strange." Bill snorted. "Daniel Cobb, the old recluse? Heard of him. Good fisherman, they say." He sipped soup. "Look, I'm not big on ghost stories. We should be cautious about prowlers, yes. But if you're worried it's something else." Rory shrugged. "Just want to stay alert. People in town talk about it like it's half rumor, half real." They finished lunch in strained silence, each lost in thought. On their way out, Tessa from the grocery strolled by, recognized Rory and offered a quick smile. She glanced at Bill, then turned back to Rory. "Catch the weird show last night? Some folks said they saw lights dancing near the cove." Rory frowned. "No, I missed it. My dad wasn't feeling well." Tessa's gaze flicked to Bill sympathetically, then she lowered her voice. "Well, if you see anything, let me know. The rumor mill's on fire this morning. Someone swore they heard chanting again." She shrugged. "Probably nonsense, but who knows?" As they left the cafe, Bill gripped Rory's arm. "Chanting now? This is getting ridiculous." But Rory glimpsed genuine worry behind his father's bluster. He realized that no matter how Bill dismissed it outwardly, the tension was wearing on him too. They drove back to the cabin, the weight of Redwood Lake's mysteries heavier than ever. While Bill lay down for a nap, Rory ventured outside, gazing at the water under the midday sun. So calm, so peaceful, yet behind that veneer lay a swirl of rumors. He wondered if the truth would ever surface, or if Redwood Lake's secrets were destined to remain half-submerged forever. Determined to chase down actual answers rather than rumors, Rory decided to interview more locals. The next morning he drove alone to Redwood Pine's modest library, a quaint stone building on a side street. Inside he found a single librarian, Miss Hathaway, shelving books with quiet efficiency. She greeted him politely, and he explained his interest in Redwood Lake's history. She showed him to a cramped archive room filled with file boxes, old newspapers, and weathered manila folders. Rory dug in, flipping through clippings that ranged from mundane lake events, regattas, picnics, to the occasional bizarre mention. Fisherman reports phantom lights, 1989. Mysterious disappearance of camp counselor, 1997. Local teen found after night lost in woods, 2003. Patterns emerged, though scattered. Redwood Lake had a small but persistent string of odd incidents. He paused at a folder labeled Unexplained Phenomena. Inside, someone had collected typed or handwritten accounts from residents over decades. One recounted hearing voices chanting on the water. Another described glimpses of ghostly figures among the pines. Some stories overlapped with the cove near the Dwyer cabin. A chill tiptoed down Rory's spine. He jotted notes, taking photos with his phone. Miss Hathaway approached quietly. "Finding anything interesting?" He hesitated. "Plenty of rumors. Just trying to see if there's a common thread." Sensing her curiosity, he added, "I'm staying at the Dwyer place. People mention it a lot." Her expression shifted. "Yes, that cabin was owned by the Dwyers for years, good folks. But rumor says one of them dabbled in spiritual practices, claimed Redwood Lake had converging energies. The details are sketchy. Might be why folks attach so many legends to that area." Rory exhaled. "I see. So it might be superstition layered onto normal events." Miss Hathaway gave a wry smile. "Or maybe there's some truth behind it all. Hard to say. Redwood Lake can be evocative. Many find solace. Others sense a deeper pull." He thanked her and checked out a couple of local history books. Outside, the sun glared and the air felt heavy, almost electric. He realized how hungry he was for clarity, some rational explanation. Maybe Redwood Lake's electromagnetic fields caused illusions, or certain pockets of gas created illusions of light. He recalled reading about other haunted locales eventually explained by science. Could that be the case here? On his drive back, he found himself rethinking the cove. If the Dwyers believed in converging energies, maybe the area near the cabin was historically significant. He wondered how that might tie into Bill's headaches or the footprints. As he navigated the winding lake road, his phone buzzed. Tessa texting, "Heard from a friend near your side of the lake. They found weird symbols carved into a tree. Be safe." He stared at the message, tension coiling in his gut. At the cabin, he discovered Bill on the porch, eyes closed, apparently fighting another headache. Rory sat beside him, quietly relaying the library findings and Tessa's note. Bill let out a weary sigh. So it's not just us. The more we hear, the stranger it gets. They lapsed into silence, the hush around them thick with unspoken questions. Redwood Lake offered no answers, only the gentle lap of water against the shore, and the growing sense that something lay just out of sight, waiting. That evening, Rory tried to coax Bill into a quick walk around the property, hoping some fresh air might alleviate his father's stress. They ambled through the pines, the late sun throwing elongated shadows across the underbrush. Bill pressed a hand to his temple occasionally but managed to keep pace. A slight breeze rustled leaves overhead. They eventually reached the small clearing on the cabin's east side, near where Rory had glimpsed footprints before. He scanned the ground. The older tracks had faded, but fresh impressions appeared, similar boots heading deeper into the woods. Bill grimaced at the sight. We might have a trespasser. Could be a hunter or someone up to no good. A flicker of anger flared in Rory. I'm tired of being spied on. Maybe we should follow them. Bill hesitated. Not sure that's wise. We don't know who we're dealing with. But Rory's frustration overrode caution. They followed the boot prints until the trees grew denser, the canopy blocking the sun's last rays. The footprints veered left, curving toward the rocky edge of the cove. Thorns snagged their sleeves and they had to sidestep fallen branches. Bird calls fell silent as dusk gathered. Suddenly they heard a rustle. Rory froze, motioning for Bill to stop. The sound came from behind a boulder, perhaps 20 yards away. Heart pounding, Rory edged forward, forcing each step to be quiet. Bill hung back, face etched with worry. The footprints led around that boulder, and the rustling sounded like someone rummaging. Could it be an animal? Or a person? Rory caught a glimpse of movement, then a figure in a hooded jacket darted away, disappearing into thicker brush. Hey! Rory shouted, breaking into a run. Bill cursed behind him, calling for caution. Within seconds, Rory realized he was losing the chase. The figure moved swiftly, weaving among trees, soon out of sight. Panting, Rory reached the spot where the person had been. The ground was disturbed, a plastic bag half buried in the leaves. Bill caught up, breathing heavily. You all right? Yeah, Rory panted. They got away. But check this out. He bent and pulled the bag free. Inside were scraps of paper, a small notebook, and something that made his stomach lurch. A single Polaroid photo of a different cabin occupant dated years ago. The face was partially blurred, but the location looked suspiciously like the Dwyer cabin's dock. Why would anyone keep this stashed here? They retreated to the clearing, scanning warily for signs of the trespasser. None. Back at the cabin, they examined the contents by lamplight. The notebook's pages contained cryptic lines, some in shaky handwriting, others scrawled with symbols resembling those Redwood Lake rumors. A date repeated multiple times, circled heavily, August 17th. It was just a week away. Bill rubbed his brow, pained. Is someone planning a gathering or something? This is creepy. Rory felt dread coil in his stomach. We have to show the sheriff or at least someone. It's not normal. But what do we even say? Bill muttered, eyes flicking to the photo. We found suspicious notes in the woods after chasing a shadowy figure. It sounds like a horror story. Rory set the bag aside, heart thudding. Then let's do what we can, keep watch, lock up. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to handle this. But as night closed in again, the intangible presence of Redwood Lake's secrets weighed on them, heavier than ever. August 17th arrived under a thick cover of clouds. No dramatic sunrise, just a dull gray light that bled into the morning. Rory felt restless from the moment he woke. He scanned the yard for footprints, none new. Bill appeared in the kitchen looking pale but determined to stay upright. They shared a brief breakfast of coffee and toast, exchanging few words. The looming date weighed on them. At mid-morning, Tessa texted, "My friend says those symbols might be an amalgam of old runes, can't decipher fully. Just be careful." The cryptic nature of it only ramped up Rory's nerves. He kept watch on Bill, who insisted he was fine, taking medication to stave off the worst of the headache. By late afternoon, Rory felt compelled to do something proactive. He rummaged in a storage closet for an old lantern and tested its battery. Then he found a worn pair of binoculars. If anything was going to happen that night, he wanted to be prepared to observe from a distance, maybe gather photographic proof. "I'll keep an eye out," he told Bill. "But if you're not feeling well, please don't push yourself to come along." Bill grunted, eyeing him warily. "You really think something's happening tonight?" Rory shrugged. Could be. The date was circled in that weird notebook. It might be a bust, but I'd rather not be caught off guard. Twilight came swiftly. The clouds lingered, turning the sky into a bruise-colored canvas. The lake looked darker than usual, its surface rippling with a light breeze. After dinner, Bill decided he couldn't just sit idle. Despite Rory's protest, his father grabbed a flashlight and insisted on accompanying him to the perimeter of the property. If something is going on, I won't let you face it alone, Bill said firmly. They left the cabin lights off, locking up behind them. With measured steps, they crept into the pines, the hush of evening pressing in. Distant frogs croaked, and the occasional fish splashed near the shore. Farther along the cove, a faint glow flickered. Rory tensed, glancing at Bill. He raised the binoculars to his eyes, struggling to make sense of the shadowy forms. Multiple lights? Possibly lanterns or flashlights. They seemed to gather near a cluster of rocks close to the water. A chill crawled up Rory's spine. This was real, no half-imagined rumor. Figures moved in unison, forming a small circle. Even at a distance it looked like a ritual. He saw a tall shape at the center, arms raised. Bill inhaled sharply behind him. What in God's name? Steadying his nerves, Rory snapped a few photos with his phone, but the darkness made them grainy. At that moment, a low chanting floated across the water, eerily similar to the whispers he'd heard on the rowboat. The language was indecipherable, harsh syllables, rhythmic, sending goosebumps across Rory's arms. They crouched behind a fallen log, hearts pounding. Bill pressed a hand to his forehead, eyes squeezed shut. Rory feared his dad's headache might flare under the stress. But Bill clung to composure. Together they watched as the chanting rose, then paused. One figure approached the water's edge, tossed something in, a bundle or object that created a splash. The chanting resumed, voices echoing. Rory's stomach lurched. These were no aimless thrill-seekers. Some sort of purposeful ceremony was unfolding. He struggled to decide what to do. Call the sheriff? Intervene? The group numbered at least 6. Running in blindly seemed foolish, yet letting them continue felt wrong. The standoff of fear and confusion kept him rooted in place, the cove's darkness swallowing the scene like a living entity. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. The chanting swelled, then receded. The figures moved with deliberate gestures, occasionally lifting their lanterns to the sky. Rory guessed they were performing a series of ritual actions, though the purpose was unclear. Bill trembled beside him, beads of sweat on his brow. I should call the sheriff, Rory whispered, fumbling for his phone. He cursed softly upon seeing no signal. The coverage on this side of the lake was notoriously poor. We might need to drive toward town. Just then, one figure raised a staff or pole above their head, prompting the others to kneel. The chanting paused. An electric hush fell over the cove. Rory felt a prickle of dread, as though nature itself was holding its breath. Then a sudden cry tore through the night, one raw, agonized shout that snapped the group's formation. 2 figures rushed forward, apparently assisting someone who had collapsed. Lanterns wavered, casting frantic shadows. Rory's heart hammered. Had something gone wrong within their own ritual? As confusion rippled through the gathering, Bill stood, face set. Come on, let's get out of here, he murmured, tugging Rory's arm. We'll get help. They retreated as stealthily as possible, weaving through the pines. But adrenaline spiked when they heard voices behind them, louder and more disordered. Flashlight beams sliced through the trees. The group must have realized they had witnesses or that their ceremony had been interrupted somehow. Rory urged Bill to move faster. They stumbled over roots, half blinded by darkness. The path toward the cabin felt endless. Then a beam of light washed over them from behind, accompanied by an angry shout. Rory's throat tightened. Were they being chased? Bill cursed, grabbing Rory's sleeve. Keep running. Another shout followed, closer than before. They sprinted, lungs burning, weaving among tall pines. Branches scratched their arms. A twig snapped ahead, and for a terrifying second Rory feared they were cut off. But the shape in front of them turned out to be a deer, bolting away in panic at their approach. Finally, the cabin's faint outline emerged from the gloom. Rory fumbled with his keys, cursing as they slipped from his sweaty grip. Bill doubled over, panting, his face contorted in pain. The headache was clearly raging. At last, Rory managed to unlock the door. They tumbled inside, slamming it shut and throwing the latch. Rory flicked on the lights, chest heaving. For a moment, they stood in stunned silence, trying to catch their breath. Bill collapsed onto the couch, pressing his hand to his temple. Rory checked the windows. Outside, no sign of immediate pursuit. Perhaps the cult-like group scattered or retreated to handle their own crisis. Rory dialed 911 on the landline phone they'd installed for emergencies, only to realize it had no dial tone. Some glitch or maybe sabotage. Panic flared. "We need to get to town," he said, voice trembling. But Bill groaned, wincing. "I don't think I can drive, son. And I might pass out if I try riding in a bumpy jeep. Just give me a moment." Torn between concern for his father and fear of the group outside, Rory hovered uncertainly. If the chanting figures regrouped and came after them, they were vulnerable. But Bill clearly needed rest. In desperation, Rory peered out the window again, scanning the darkness. Redwood Lake's reflection was calm, as if indifferent to their plight. Fear coiled in his gut. This was far from over. A tense hour passed with no sign of intruders. Bill's headache subsided enough for him to sit upright, though he remained pale and shaky. They hastily packed essentials: wallets, phone chargers, a first aid kit, intent on driving to Redwood Pines to alert the authorities. The Jeep's headlights cut through the night as Rory navigated the winding road, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting another vehicle or robed figures sprinting from the shadows. They arrived at the sheriff's station in Redwood Pines just before midnight. The small brick building glowed under a single street lamp. Inside, the deputy at the front desk eyed them warily. Rory launched into a halting explanation. Mysterious group performing a ritual, possible danger. Bill chimed in, voice shaky but firm. He described the chanting, the robed figures, and how one person seemed injured. Deputy Morales listened with growing concern. "All right, let me get the sheriff." 10 minutes later, Sheriff Barnett, a grizzled man with a tired gaze, ushered them into a cramped office. He peppered them with questions. "How many did you see? Exactly where? Any license plates? Any sign of a weapon?" "We couldn't see details," Rory admitted. "It was dark, but at least 6 or 7. They had lanterns or flashlights, chanting near the cove. Something about August 17th, a date we found in a suspicious notebook." The sheriff scratched his stubbly chin. "We get occasional reports of odd gatherings. Usually they vanish by the time we investigate. But this sounds more serious. Someone got hurt, you say?" Bill nodded. "Seemed like it. Or something spooked them." Sheriff Barnett leaned back in his chair, sighing. "We'll send a couple of deputies out there tonight. But it's a big area to comb in the dark. Likely they've scattered." Rory bristled. "That's it? A couple of deputies?" Barnett met his gaze. "Look, kid, we have limited manpower. If they're gone, there's not much we can do but keep an eye out. We'll take your statements, see if we find any evidence at that spot." He gestured at Bill. "Your father looks like he needs medical attention more than anything else." Bill glowered, but Rory squeezed his shoulder. The older man indeed seemed drained, eyes heavy-lidded. The sheriff's pragmatic approach felt anticlimactic, yet maybe it was realistic. Redwood Pines wasn't a bustling city with squads of officers ready to mobilize. They did what they could with limited resources. After giving formal statements, father and son were directed to the local clinic. Bill submitted to a thorough checkup and was given stronger medication for his migraines, along with instructions to reduce stress. By the time they left the clinic, dawn was breaking, painting the horizon in gentle pink. Weary beyond belief, they returned to Redwood Lake. The sheriff had posted a single deputy near the cove, though the man admitted he'd found only footprints and disturbed ground, no sign of the group. Bill slumped in the passenger seat, leaning his head against the window. Rory felt a swirl of relief that at least the incident was reported, yet frustration gnawed at him. No arrests, no resolution. Back at the cabin, the lake shimmered under a fresh morning light, deceptively serene. They collapsed onto the porch steps, too tired to go inside. Despite everything, a subtle sense of closure loomed. They had faced Redwood Lake's mystery head-on, survived a harrowing chase, and alerted the law. Maybe that was enough. Still, Rory harbored the uneasy knowledge that the group remained out there somewhere. Yet as the sun climbed higher, the hush of Redwood Lake felt less threatening, more like a watchful guardian. Bill placed a hand on Rory's shoulder, voice raw with emotion. "We've got each other's backs. We'll see this through, whatever it takes." Rory nodded, letting the sunrise warm his tired bones. Even if the secrets of Redwood Lake never fully came to light, they had forged a new bond amid the shadows. And sometimes, that was enough to carry them forward into the uncertain days ahead.